Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. Trump calls NATO a bunch of cowards because they don't want to die for him. As Iran continues to crush Israel and the U.S. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Revolutionary salute. It's getting worse as the days go by and Trump is losing and he's lashing out. He says NATO is finished.
Good afternoon. President Trump has upped the ante in his long-running dispute with other members of NATO. Writing on Truth Social, the US president called other countries cowards over their conduct towards the war with Iran. Let's have a look at that post in full. He says, without the USA, NATO is a paper tiger. They didn't want to join the fight to stop a nuclear-powered Iran. Now that fight is militarily won, he says, with very little danger for them. They complain about the high oil prices they're forced to pay, but don't want to help open the Strait of Hormuz. A simple military maneuver, he thinks, that is the single reason for the high oil price. So easy for them to do with so little risk. Cowards, and we will remember, he finishes, signing it, President Donald J. Trump. Earlier, I spoke to our US correspondent, David Blevins.
His tweet this morning, I think, is much more about pressuring allies to join the United States in its action against Iran than anything to do with NATO capabilities. In fact, some might suggest that he is now preparing for an exit to pass the problem of the Strait of Hormuz to those allies. If we analyse it very briefly, strategically, not that the president necessarily thinks strategically before he posts on Truth Social, I think it is one about leaning on those allies to protect shipping in the Strait as he tries to find a way out of this war now. It is two, reinforcing his long-running theme that America carries too much of the burden within NATO. And then three, there is a domestic aspect to it as well. He wants voters here in the United States to hear the message that America is doing too much. Why should we be defending them? As you say, in the last few minutes, he's been presenting the Commander-in-Chief trophy to the Navy Academy, who have won the annual round-robin competition between the three colleges, Army, Navy, and Air Force. And the president did speak very briefly about Iran. Let's just listen to that.
I want to begin by just saying we're doing extremely well in Iran. The difference between them and us is they had a Navy 2 weeks ago. They have no Navy anymore. It's all at the bottom of the sea. 58 ships knocked down in 2 days. And we have the greatest Navy anywhere in the world. It's not even close. So we are doing really well. We're not going to let them have nuclear weapons.
Imagine that. He thinks because he's standing there and said, we got the greatest Navy in the history of the world. The world is laughing at you because you won't send that great Navy through the Strait of Hormuz. And you're telling the world you have already crushed Iran. They don't have anything to shoot back. Well, take your greatest Navy into the Strait of Hormuz and help the world economy, but you can't. This is why it's embarrassing day by day because he keeps making up lies. Even NATO, a French general said the reason NATO will not help Trump is because it's like getting tickets, cheap tickets to the Titanic when it's already sinking. Why would they do that?
They had them, they'd use them, and we're not going to let that happen. Should have been done a long time ago by other presidents.
David, if we hear that and we think about that post that I just read out on Truth Social saying that the war is militarily over, do you think, and are others saying, that he might now be seriously looking for an off-ramp with all this?
Well, that is definitely one of the possibilities, that he thinks it's time for America's allies to take over the challenges. Certainly, he continues to play them down from a US perspective, saying his enemies have been obliterated, a word we're hearing a lot, that they are weeks ahead of schedule. Interestingly, also yesterday, when he was asked if the United States was preparing to put boots on the ground, he said no, then qualified it by adding, if I was, I wouldn't tell you. Now, that's reminiscent of a comment he made made on this very day 3 weeks ago when he was asked, is the United States about to start bombing Iran? And he said no, but if we were, I wouldn't tell you. In terms of that post online, though, this morning, the reality is, yes, America accounts for 60 to 70% of NATO's defence spending, but NATO is not powerless because it includes the militaries of the UK, France, Germany and Turkey, among many others.
Get tax expertise without hidden fees. Switch to a TurboTax expert for
Iran has announced the launch of the 67th wave of ballistic missiles under Operation True Promise 4, targeting U.S. bases in the Gulf region and across the Israeli-occupied territories. Iranian Revolutionary Guard released footage on March 20th, showing the first missile likely being a Khaibar Shekin 2, or Fata 1, which have a similar external appearance, in retaliation, bombing aircraft shelters and radar equipment at enemy bases earlier in the day. The heavy missile barrage successfully targeted their military infrastructure, using long-range and medium-range, solid and liquid fuel systems. In this wave of operations, Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, an early warning missile defense radar at the base in Iraq's Al Anbar region, and the Israeli regime's satellite, radar, and air defense centers across the central, southern, and northern occupied territories were also targeted, the IRGC reported. Satellite imagery confirms widespread damage at Ali Al Salem Air Base, with aircraft hangars burning on the morning. The airbase is a major hub for the U.S.-led coalition, hosting American, Kuwaiti, and Italian aircraft. 3 Kuwaiti Eurofighter jets were reportedly destroyed, and 2 Italian Eurofighters damaged in the Iranian attack. According to a Kuwaiti resident, sirens sounded for 2 hours non-stop that morning. Iran has blinded the enemy's eyes after destroying radar and air defense systems in the Gulf states, which protect U.S.-Israeli interests. Now, just a few clips are enough to illustrate what happened in Israel. There was only a 15-second gap between the sound of the air raid alarm and the arrival of the Iranian sub-munitions hitting Tel Aviv. Shrapnel from the falling cluster missiles caused widespread damage. Meanwhile in Haifa, after publicity about the Iranian missiles' impact, a fire erupted, destroying more than a dozen shipping containers, with losses reportedly reaching millions.
Tel Aviv is in absolute chaos this hour, and I want you to really let that sink in, because what we are witnessing is not just another military escalation. It is a historic collapse of Israel's security narrative right before our eyes. In a stunning precision operation that has shattered every assumption the occupation forces wanted the world to believe, the Lebanese resistance successfully targeted the exact venue where Benjamin Netanyahu was holding a foreign press conference in Tel Aviv. Reports are now confirming that the moment intelligence confirmed Netanyahu's presence at the location,
a new wave of missile strikes is shaking Israel again. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has released dramatic footage claiming to show a missile strike targeting an Israeli military base near Tel Aviv.
Alarms sounded in central Israel the same day as a projectile launched from Lebanon was detected by the military's air defense systems before it was intercepted.
With Iran launching its rockets just as Iran's missiles approach Israel.
Precision-guided missiles streaked towards the site, leaving the fate of the man, often labeled a war criminal by international critics, completely unknown. Images circulating online, captured in desperate frenzy, show Netanyahu being physically rushed, practically dragged, to a secure bunker. But since that moment, his whereabouts have remained unaccounted for, plunging the Israeli military establishment into a state of panic that they are trying and failing to hide. This is the reality of Netanyahu's so-called total victory doctrine, a doctrine that promised security, but has delivered nothing but the sight of a sitting prime minister fleeing for his life while resistance forces prove that they can reach any target at any time, no matter how heavily guarded. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. This spectacular strike on the press conference venue comes merely hours after the Lebanese resistance published jaw-dropping footage of a separate, highly sophisticated operation inside the Taibeh project area, using long-range night vision capabilities, a clear testament to their evolved technological prowess. The resistance documented the complete destruction of at least one Israeli tank, reduced to a burning hulk, with one or two additional armored vehicles suffering direct hits and billowing smoke. The footage shows Israeli forces retreating in disarray, leaving their damaged equipment behind. This was not a glancing blow. It was a statement. While the world watches Tel Aviv burn with fear, the resistance continues to dismantle the myth of an invincible Israeli army, one tank at a time. And as if to drive the point home further, reports are now linking this onslaught to Iran's 67th wave of operations, which struck a building simultaneously. Initial reports suggest that the building destroyed in Iran's strike was the very same press conference venue, a venue that had been rapidly evacuated moments before the Lebanese resistance's missiles found their mark. The coordination, the timing, and the sheer precision expose the complete and utter failure of Israeli intelligence. Before we dive deeper into this collapse, if you are gaining clarity from this report, I need you to hit that like button until it turns red. Share this video far and wide because the mainstream media will lie to you, and drop a comment, even if it is just a dot, to show the algorithm that the world is watching. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. We are the ones doing the real work of honest journalism, and without your support, these voices of resistance get silenced. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened, because the layers of this operation go deeper than anyone anticipated. So let's talk about what the Israeli media and their Western backers tried to hide. For months, we have been fed this narrative that the Lebanese resistance had been crippled, as Netanyahu so arrogantly proclaimed at the United Nations podium. He stood there, just weeks ago, declaring that he had crushed the bulk of Hamas's terror machine and crippled Hezbollah, taking out most of their leaders. But what we saw yesterday and today is the absolute repudiation of that arrogance. The Lebanese resistance didn't just survive the brutal genocidal campaign launched against Lebanon. They emerged more advanced, more precise, and more lethal than ever before. The strike on the Taibeh project, detailed in footage that has gone viral across X, showcases a tactical sophistication that Israeli generals could only dream of: long-range night vision, precise anti-armor capabilities, and the ability to film the destruction of Merkava tanks, the pride of the Israeli military, before forcing the soldiers to flee on foot. This is not the behavior of a crippled force. This is the behavior of a resistance movement that has been waiting, watching, and evolving. And let's be very clear about why the Lebanese resistance is succeeding where Netanyahu is failing. It's because Netanyahu's strategy is cowardice dressed up as strength. His strategy, if you can even call it that, relies on collateral damage, a disgusting euphemism for the massacre of civilians in Lebanon, while his soldiers hide behind concrete walls and air defense systems. He sends his air force to level apartment buildings, claiming they are hiding a missile. But when it comes time to face the resistance in the bush, in the hills, in the Taibeh project, his army retreats. We saw it with our own eyes in that video. Smoke pouring from Israeli tanks, soldiers abandoning their positions while the resistance fighters stand their ground. This is the reality of the Israeli army. A force that can only operate when it has complete air superiority against unarmed civilians. The moment they face a fortified resistance fighter with a precision weapon, they break and they run. It is cowardice, pure and simple, wrapped in the flag of a genocidal doctrine. Now, let me bring you the details that are making the Israeli military censors lose their minds. The Lebanese resistance has been underestimated for decades, but the reports coming out of the region, particularly from pro-Iranian sources and detailed analyses from military observers, show that their arsenal has undergone a fundamental shift. They are no longer relying solely on the old doctrine of mass rocket barrages. Instead, they have mastered the art of the precision strike. We are talking about anti-armor missiles that can be fired from concealed positions, sometimes even from holes in the ground, making it nearly impossible for Israeli spotting planes to locate the launch crews. This is a tactical nightmare for the occupation forces, and it gets worse. The resistance has shifted its production emphasis to low-cost, high-impact kamikaze drones. We're talking about the Shahed 101, a drone that can fit in a crate the size of a television cabinet, costs practically nothing to build compared to Israel's multi-million-dollar interception systems, and can travel hundreds of kilometers. This is a mathematical and strategic problem that Netanyahu has no answer for.
Drones is a nightmare, and that's the new warfare. You don't need airplanes if you have drones. And Israel, the U.S., and all those Arab puppets is finding it out. They fuck with the wrong nation.
While Israel spends fortunes on Iron Dome batteries to intercept these drones, the resistance is churning them out at a fraction of the cost, rebuilding their stockpiles faster than Israel can destroy them. Every single claim by Netanyahu that they have devastated the resistance's capabilities is a lie designed to buy him political time. In reality, as seen in Tel Aviv today, the resistance has never been more capable. And let's not ignore the ironic, almost comical element of this whole disaster. Just weeks ago, Netanyahu stood at the UN and told the world that Iran's terror axis had been crippled. He boasted about destroying Iran's ballistic missile programs and claimed that he and Donald Trump had delivered on their promise to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. And yet, here we are. The Iranian military, acting in perfect sync with the Lebanese resistance, launched its 67th wave of operations simultaneously with the strike on Netanyahu's location. This is not the behavior of a crippled axis. This is the behavior of a resistance front that is operating with complete coordination, superior tactical intelligence, and the ability to penetrate the heart of Tel Aviv. Netanyahu's policy of believing that through wars, Israel will achieve peace has been exposed as the delusional fantasy it always was. It is a policy that has resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent Lebanese and Palestinian civilians, but it has not brought security to Israel. Instead, it has brought rockets to his own press conference. The images coming out of Tel Aviv are those of a city under siege, a population realizing that their government has no clue how to protect them. The fact that Netanyahu's whereabouts remain unknown hours after the strike speaks volumes. It speaks to a failure of intelligence. How did the resistance know he was there? It speaks to a failure of security. How did precision munitions get through the vaunted air defenses? And most importantly, it speaks to the political and strategic bankruptcy of a leader who promised total victory, but has delivered only total chaos. The Western media, particularly the American outlets that coddle this war criminal, will try to frame this as a terror attack. But we know better. This is what resistance looks like when you push people to the brink. This is what happens when Netanyahu, with the blank check from the Biden and now Trump administrations, thinks he can assassinate leaders, destroy cities, and murder civilians with impunity. And here is where we have to talk about the hypocrisy of Washington. While Donald Trump poses with Netanyahu, talking about peace and stunning comebacks, his administration is actively arming the machine that is destroying the Middle East. But even America's wonder weapons are failing. There are reports, confirmed by Hebrew media outlets, that the United States is currently panicking over an unexploded GBU-39B precision bomb that fell during a strike in the Dahieh suburb of Beirut. Apparently, this 110-kilogram smart bomb, one of the most advanced in the Western arsenal, capable of hitting within a 1-meter radius, failed to detonate. Now, the Americans are demanding that Lebanon hand it back, terrified that its sensitive technology, including the AFX-757 explosive components and guidance systems, will end up in the hands of the resistance, or worse, with Iran or Russia.
Hi, my name is Tami, and I would like to give you a few reasons why you should consider dating a young Asian lady. You can choose a potential spouse from Vietnam, the Philippines, Thailand, or Indonesia. The geography is boundless. Have you noticed that Asian women have become more and more popular? I mean that they are everywhere. In famous magazines, on Instagram as top bloggers, on the runways, and on billboards. More importantly, they are in men's heart.
This is the ultimate metaphor for this entire war. The occupation and its American sponsors spend billions on high-tech weapons designed to kill with impunity. And those weapons are either failing mid-air, being destroyed by resistance fighters in the Taipei Project, or landing as booty for the resistance to analyze. The United States is now caught in a nightmare scenario in Beirut, facing opposition from the Lebanese resistance, who view handing over the missile as a violation of sovereignty. So while Netanyahu is hiding in a bunker somewhere in Tel Aviv, the Americans are begging Lebanon to give them back their broken toy. This is the state of the so-called invincible axis of the West. We have to mock this failure for what it is. Netanyahu believed he could manage the conflict. He believed he could keep the Palestinians stateless and the resistance contained while he made deals with Arab countries, selling out the Palestinian cause for normalization. That strategy, the strategy of divide and rule, has collapsed. It collapsed on October 7th, and it has been collapsing ever since. Now, he stands accused by his own people of leading them into a war without end, a war that has brought the fighting to the streets of Tel Aviv instead of keeping it in Gaza or Lebanon. His far-right coalition, the same settler extremists who pushed for this genocidal war, are now squabbling and threatening to quit, realizing that total victory was a lie sold to them by a desperate politician trying to avoid prison. The demands for a committee to investigate the security failures are growing, and Netanyahu knows that once the dust settles, the finger will point directly at him. He delayed, he lied, and he dragged an entire region into hell just to save his own political skin. And now, the hell has come back to his front door. You cannot hide from the consequences of your crimes. Netanyahu tried to hide behind a podium, behind a press conference, behind the flag of a fabricated comeback. And today, that podium was turned to rubble. That press conference became a battlefield. And that flag of the occupation, is now drenched in the humiliation of a leader who ran for his life. Stay with us as we continue to follow the latest. Drop your thoughts in the comments.
Now we need to see that we know that the Zionists, the imposters, they killed the great Larijani, very revolutionary man in Iran. He was really keeping things on track and keeping the revolution going. They killed him, but he was about peace. He didn't want to go all the way. I said this, they killing peacemakers, and everybody who get in position is people who want total war with the Zionists and the U.S.
I laughed when my buddy told me.
And they're gonna regret
$20 AI does the investing. 28
killing
days.
the people who don't
I stopped
want
laughing.
nuclear weapons. And I just
You are
think that
scared.
we here in America, we don't die from nuclear war over these people. And that's serious. This could spiral out of control because Iran could have a nuclear bomb in maybe a month. I'm pretty sure they deep in inner earth working on one right now.
Scared from Iran. They should be scared because they have capabilities and they're proving how capable they are now by actually standing up against this Zionist Epstein empire, this child-killing barbaric empire. And they're not really worried about anything. They're not making too many calculations, although so many figures have been assassinated. And that's something that the Zionists and the American establishment, they also brag about that. You know, we killed the Ayatollah and we did this and that. Okay, you killed Ali Larijani. Ali Larijani was martyred. Man who was a philosopher, a diplomat, a man who had history in the army, and he was martyred. Although he led a lot of the talks, by the way, and he showed a lot of pragmatism through his period. The Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. Okay. You killed Ali Larijani. Who took his place? A man called Hussein Dehqan took his place. This man over here. Let's read a little bit about Mr. Hussein Dehqan. Okay. Going on, Iranian politician, former military officer. Okay. During the Islamic Revolution, he took part in the occupation of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Oh, right. Okay. As commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Force in Tehran, he oversaw the execution of opponents. He commanded the IRGC forces in Lebanon and was among the orchestrators of the 1983 bombing of the American embassy in Beirut, in which 241 Americans were killed. Well done. Well done, Trump. Well done. You targeted Larijani and you brought Hussein. I'm sure you're doing yourself a favor, aren't you? Now, what people need to understand, and the reason why I'm giving this example is to show how stupid these people are. Inevitably, what's going to happen now and what's happening now is, by the way, the United States and Israel solidified the ongoing notion of the Iranian establishment as a whole that America is the great Satan and Israel is the small Satan. And of course, they clarified what they mean by Satan and who they mean. Not the American people, the establishment. Hell, the American people know that their government is Satan. As in, so Iran is just clarifying that now. Nothing bizarre about that. So some people were saying, well, why are you, calling America Satan? And why are you calling Israel Satan? And, deals with the world and what have you. Now, both great Satan and tiny Satan, unless you want to flip them, if you disagree, prove them right. They prove them right. They go and talk to them, although they backstabbed them and killed their leaders and have sanctions on them that affect the people. I mean, again, we spoke about the sanctions of the United States between the early 70s up until the late 2010s or 2021. US sanctions imposed on countries, according to recent stats, led to the death of over 30 million people. So this is an invisible genocide that America's doing against other countries. They make people suffer simply because they want them to surrender their wealth, their sovereignty, their independence to foreign entities and foreign global companies and corporations, when Iran told them no. So you had a government and an establishment that spoke, that still opened channels of communication, despite all of the treacherous, by the way, immoral, vile behavior of all of the American politicians who were negotiating with Iran, by the way, especially under Trump, who unilaterally withdrew from an agreement, let's remind people of that, without any just cause, without any reason. Like he was saying, oh, we unfroze their assets and they got billions. Now he is lifting sanctions and they're going to get billions. All hypocrisy. But what's more important here is the fact that now the Iranians who weren't really agreeing with the establishment in Iran are realizing, okay, all right.
Right now, millions are drinking filthy water, not because they want to, but because it's all they have. In Gaza, Pakistan, Syria, Africa, and beyond, families are being forced to drink water that is killing them. And for as little as $50, you can provide clean water to 50 children for an entire year. Donate your zakah, your sadaqah, to humanity now.
Right. That's why the supreme leader was calling them that. That's why our country is trying to protect itself. That's why we have so many missiles and what have you. That's why. And now that the IRGC and the Iranian armed forces are not only gaining popularity in Iran, but globally, people celebrating the attacks of Iran against the Epstein regime and the genocide state, they're going to inevitably have more power in Iran. That's why you have a man who orchestrated one of the orchestrators of the bombing of the US embassy that killed over 200 Marines at the time, 241. And the occupation of the US embassy in Tehran, this man replacing Ali Larijani. Ali Larijani, by the way, who under him they were talking, but it was under Ali Larijani there were actual negotiations. It was under the previous supreme leader, Iran didn't have nukes because he had a fatwa, a religious decree, that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons. Now they put all of that in the dustbin and we're looking at a new era for Iran. A new era where Iran is going to be even more powerful, even more resistance, even more of everything resembles and everything it is. Everything is going to be intensified now. And they can kiss the old days goodbye. That's not going to happen again. You're now talking with a different type of administration, a different type of Iran. Right now, misinformation spreads faster than facts, especially on the most sensitive global stories. NVP uses uncensored AI analysis to verify the most controversial topics and separate signal from propaganda in real time. Instead of guessing who to trust, you can see structured verification and analysis behind every major issue.
Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, March 20th, 2026, and our dear friends, Larry Johnson and Carl Wilkerson are back with us. Welcome back.
Glad to be with you. Good to be with you. We survived another week.
Yeah, exactly. Today is a very special day. It's a new year. It's a new, as we call it in Iran, Nowruz is a new year in Iran, and other thing is that the last day of Ramadan is the Eid al-Fitr, when the fasting is just coming to an end, and it's important for Muslims, it's important for Iranians, and today is a good day, but unfortunately the war is
raging on.
Exactly. It's just making everything so difficult right now. And let me start, Larry, with you. Yesterday, we had Donald Trump talking about the current situation with the war against Iran. He said he was describing the current situation of the American army against Iran. Here is what he said. It was yesterday at 12 p.m. what he said.
Just about everything there is to obliterate, including leadership. The Navy's gone, their Air Force is gone, their anti-aircraft equipment is gone. We're flying wherever we want, Pete. We have nobody even shooting at us.
Quickest way to shrink your prostate.
The best way to fix prostate problems? Saw palmetto? Nope. What about Flomax?
And at 4 p.m. yesterday, we've learned that the Iranian air defense system hit F-35 fighter jet, and they have released this footage, and it's showing, which was reported by CNN. Then, do you believe, Larry, that Donald Trump is receiving false information? Because somehow it's some delusional the way that he's talking about the battlefield. It seems that everything is done, they have nothing to fight back, or he's trying to make his case in order to show that how powerful he is, and he has total, dominance over what's going on.
Well, I'm not a physician. I did work as a respiratory therapy technician my way through high school, so I have some familiarity with medicine. Donald Trump is crazy. I mean, he's demented. This, and I don't say that as an insulting term. I mean that as a medical condition. He has exhibited confabulation over the course of the last, 15, 16 months while in office. Confabulation is when you say something that is objectively false, and yet you believe it's true. So it's not like, like he says, oh, we've obliterated the army. And they don't have any more Navy. They don't have any more Air Force. And then in the next breath, you say, but boy, we need the NATO navies to come with us to open the Strait of Hormuz, because essentially we can't do it ourselves. Well, wait a second. If they're obliterated, if they're 100% defeated, why? Man, just go in and take over. It's done. It's over. So his brain is not even able to reconcile such glaring contradictions. What bothers me is that the press sits around and accepts this crap without pushing back and saying, hey, you can't keep saying one thing and meaning the other. I mean, it is, I feel like that, that opening scene from the movie Amadeus, when you're walking into the insane asylum and seeing all these crazy people to get to Salieri, who's also crazy. Trump is disconnected from reality, and it's dangerous, and nobody's tackling him and stopping him from doing it.
Let me pick up on what Larry just said in one aspect, and I agree with everything he just said. That aspect is the journalist. Next door to me lives, and I won't name him, but lives a man who has the White House beat several times each 6-month period. He works for Al Jazeera. And I like him. He's a good guy. He debriefs me sometimes. But when he goes into the White House press pool, as it were, and is there, sitting there, asking questions, I want to ask him desperately. I haven't so far, but I want to, because he's a friend. But I put this question to all those people. What's wrong with you? And you know what they'll tell you? Because I've said that to 2 or 3, not him, but 2 or 3. And they say back, well, we'll get kicked out of the pool. So what? All of you get up and walk out. What do you think that would do to the press for the White House? Get up, all of you, and walk out. Every time he starts to lie, get up and walk out. Forget it. Don't give him any coverage. But you'll never get him to do that. Partly because at least a third of them are owned by Israel.
Colonel, but there is something deeper than that. It's not just about Donald Trump himself. We had Stephen Miller coming to Fox News just saying the same thing. And here is what Scott Bessent said, who's supposed to be some sort of, brain in the administration. Here is what he said.
Said Maria, for the regime, we're back to the stuff of Baghdad Bob here. The regime is in collapse, and the people are starting to turn against them. We're starting to see defections at Treasury. We now know where the Iranian leadership bank accounts are, and those are being frozen. And we will hold them and see who comes forward in terms of defections. But we're starting to see defections throughout the regime, and that's how this ends. So the idea of some tolling arrangement is ridiculous. What President Trump is talking about, and to be clear, he has focused on Karg Island since 1988, before the Shah fell, that the U.S. should be focused on that. He is laser focused on it. As I said, there was a bombing campaign last week. The military assets on Karg Island were destroyed. And the other thing I can tell you, if you're an oil worker, you don't want to work there. So all the oil workers there are being coerced to stay there. And we will see what happens with whether that eventually becomes a U.S. asset.
He just used a previous comment that I'm not aware of, but I'm sure I know the general contents of it about Karg Island, that is, as he just presented it, a total lie. In 1988, Karg Island was being attacked by Saddam Hussein because it was the end of the Iraq-Iran war, a bloody war. And we sortied forth to reflag Kuwaiti tankers, and you know that story. Didn't do too good a job even then when we had massive naval superiority in clearing the Gulf, because Bridgerton hit a mine right away. Samuel B. Roberts hit a mine and had to limp back to Norfolk at 4 knots. We had a real problem even then, and we were massively more powerful, especially Navy-wise then than we are now. And Saddam Hussein and the UAE too, because it started about 66 and it had been pressed by a number of countries in the region for a long time. Granted, they don't have the capability we do, but they never could get it and get at it and do anything really bad to it. Now, if we're going to go do something bad to it, Nima, this is about a third the size of Manhattan. It's called the Forbidden Isle in Persian terms. It is absolutely pristine in terms of the depth of the water and everything, unlike any other place in the Gulf. It can refuel or fuel at the same time 10 super tankers. So it's absolutely essential. You take that full facility out, Putin will go from 150 million a day to 300 million a day. And the price of oil will go up significantly too. And we know that. So Bessent's lying through his teeth if he says we are going to get on there with whatever ground troops. I fear for those Marines, half of their Ospreys will crash en route. But if we're going to get on there and destroy that, we got to think really hard about how we're going to replace the throughput capacity that represents for the world oil market. And that's true of all of this game we're playing with oil. Unless we've got the oil to replace all of that we're going to eliminate, and maybe for an extended period of time, if we take some place like Karg Island and destroy the facilities there. Of course, you can't just, you got to destroy the pipes coming into it too. We're playing with a global chaos. And we've already started that, so why am I even saying that? Trump doesn't have any idea what he's doing.
Larry, your understanding, because they're sending Marines, they're sending forces it seems that they're sending to the Khark Island. I don't know any other place that they're not going to be able to get close to the Strait of Hormuz. That's why many people are somehow supposing that they're going to attack the Khark Island. Netanyahu yesterday was talking the same way, that he said the ground invasion would be, inevitable. And it seems that Israelis are advocating for that as well. It's not just about the Trump administration. What do you make of it?
I don't even know what they mean by a ground invasion. So let's start with Khark Island. And Colonel Wilkerson mentioned the possibility of Marines flying there in Ospreys. Well, the MEU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit that's en route with 2,200 Marines, let's just do the math. An Osprey can carry 24 Marines with combat loads. Okay, let's see.
If it flies.
Yeah, if it flies. So let's see that if we got 10 Osprey, that's 240. That's only basically 1/10 of it. And, maybe they're going to have to make, so maybe if we had 100 Osprey, which we don't, you could have them all fly at once and get. So number one, the Marines can't get to Khark without running the gauntlet in the Strait of Hormuz, which means the ship would be sunk. So the Marines won't get there that way. But what I am hearing is the likelihood that they're going to try to land them somewhere right around the strait on Iranian shore. Now, the MEU comes equipped. They can last 15 days in theory without being resupplied. But that's assuming sort of optimal conditions, that they're not facing missile fire, drone fire, etc. This, again, you're going to plan a military operation to be able to accomplish certain objectives. Now, what might that objective be? To secure the shore of Iran that's right there on the Gulf? Well, sorry, that's hundreds of miles long. 2,200 Marines don't cover a shoreline that's hundreds of miles long. And it's not like there's just one specific location where Iran has its missiles hidden in caves and guns that are capable, artillery pieces capable of firing into the Gulf, and not to mention the underwater drones, the submarines. I mean, Iran has a large array of options. So it's not even clear what the military mission is. Now, so I also have speculated that maybe they're going to use the Marines as a diversion while they try to launch a special operations unit to attack one of the hardened, deeply buried targets in hopes of recovering enriched uranium. That could be on the table, but I was specifically involved with that exercise 20 years ago. And at the hot wash, that after you do the exercise and you evaluate it, the lesson learned was don't do it. So I don't know if we've learned that lesson, but that was the conclusion that came out of that exercise. So this is I think people are making military decisions who don't understand a damn thing about military capabilities, logistics, and operations.
I couldn't agree with that more. When Ahmadinejad told me in New York City at the UNGA that Iran had 1,875 nautical miles of coastline on the Persian Gulf and the United States none. So who was the culprit in terms of incidents at sea?
Yeah.
I went and got my maps out. Got them right there on the floor right now. Larry's right. About 1,000 of those miles are on the eastern side. By the way, that's where Parmenion brought his craft up in order to resupply Alexander the Great. Alexander almost died because Parmenion ran into such rough situation in the Gulf, even with his boats, that he couldn't supply Alexander. And that's very rough terrain, as Larry was insinuating. Where are you going to put these Marines ashore in a traditional amphibious landing. You know, where are you going to put them ashore? Bandar Abbas, Chabahar, on the wharfs, on the beach? They're going to be dead. And also the amphibious bottom, bringing them close enough to make an amphibious assault, is going to be dead. That little thing everybody's calling a carrier, it isn't a carrier. It's an amphibious assault ship. And it's got airplanes on it. And they can support the Marines going ashore. But where are they going to go? I've done the study, the analysis of this sort of thing for PACOM years ago, but we did it. We did it because we thought we were going to be fighting the Russians coming down from Afghanistan. We couldn't understand why they were in Afghanistan. We weren't doing the political business. We were just doing the military business. And we knew they wanted a warm water port. And so we were planning for fighting them in Iran, planning for them trying to come down vicinity, Chabahar, Bandar Abbas, that area. I know that terrain. Good luck, Donald Trump. Good luck, Marines.
Yeah.
Larry, the escalation is coming to the oil facilities, gas facilities. Yesterday, Iran has hit, in response to what Israel did to the South Pars, which one of the main, facilities in Iran. And they have responded, they have attacked Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Haifa. And the attack on Qatar just, kicked out 20% of their capacity of LNG. And Donald Trump's, what we've heard from the sources, from the Axios, Tom Barak, with Barak Ravid, he said that Americans and Israelis coordinated before this attack coming. And then Donald Trump came out, said he had nothing to do with what has happened. And what is the real story? Because we have seen this before with the attack on Doha. Donald Trump came out and said he didn't know about it. What is your understanding of that?
Yeah, both are true. That likely Trump was not asked and wasn't said, hey, we want your permission to do X, Y, and Z, because he's already signed off on the execute orders. So the Navy and Air Force have complete authority to act, unless they go against what the rules of engagement were contained in that execution. But Barack is right that U.S., the Combined Air Operations Center, the CAOC, which used to be based at Al Udeid. I don't think it's still there simply because it's received so much fire from Iran that they've had to withdraw to another more secure location, perhaps Incirlik. But that CAOC monitors every single aircraft, or they used to when they had all the radars up, that takes off and lands. Right now, they do have they've got a sort of a workaround. They're using AWACS. So AWACS are in the air, providing some of the previous coverage that was provided by those ground radars that were destroyed. But the U.S. commanders absolutely knew where the Israelis were headed. And Iran had made it very clear, if you hit us here, we're going to hit you there. That will be tit for tat. And exactly what happened. And in blowing these up, this is extending the time that the world oil and liquid natural gas shortage and fertilizer shortage will be, that shortage is going to be extended. There's no any quick solution on the horizon. And I want to remind people of what bragging that Donald Trump did during the State of the Union address on the 24th of February. So this is just 4 days before he launched this attack on Iran. He said, gasoline, which reached a peak of over $6 a gallon in some states under my predecessor, it was quite honestly a disaster. is now below $2.30 a gallon in most states, and in some places $1.99 a gallon. And when I visited the great state of Iowa just a few weeks ago, I even saw $1.85 a gallon for gasoline, the lowest in 4 years and fallen fast. Well, that didn't age very well. I noticed where I live, at the start, February 28th, the gas price was $2.54. It is now up a full dollar, $3.54, and it's going to continue to rise. And Trump can't go back and pretend that he had nothing to do with this. This is all the result of his actions. And yet, once again, you don't see anybody in the press calling him out, holding him accountable, asking him the question that, hey, what happened to those low gas prices you were promising?
It's almost as if these people have no memory, as if they take no notes. They go back to their notes and look, and say, well, wait a minute, on the 28th, you said that. Very, very rarely does that happen. This is a complete and abject failure of what we call our mainstream media.
Colonel, when we look at the destruction that is happening in Iran and in Israel, it's somehow, they're comparable. But when it comes to Iran, we see the strategy is different. They didn't attack the oil facilities before Israel attacking them. And how do you see the escalation? Because if Donald Trump comes out and you cannot attack, the oil facilities, let's see what would be the next target of Israelis, other infrastructures. I don't know what they want to attack. And what would be the response from Iran? And are they going to attack desalination? Are they going to attack something that would be a great, problem, could bring some sort of catastrophe for the whole region?
I think the Iranians have been very circumspect. They don't attack specific targets that might be more to their disadvantage internationally, if you will, or even more crimes, until those targets are attacked in their country. And that's usually Israel. And they then respond in kind. I understand they've done some significant damage to Haifa's oil facilities, for example. And that was only after Israel made the attack. And I heard maybe 40 hours ago or so, someone from the administration, and then I read that Trump had actually said it. I didn't find it anywhere, but that wasn't known to him. We didn't know that Israel was going to attack the oil facilities, the implication being we would have said no, we would have stopped them had we known it. That to me is a contrived story too. Israel does whatever it wants to, whenever it wants to. But Iran has been, in my view, fairly circumspect in attacking targets that militarily significant, rather than like Netanyahu bombing everything in sight. And look at what he's doing in Lebanon right now. This is as unconscionable as the opening days of Gaza when he was killing everything in sight. He's killing everything in sight in Lebanon now, including taking out whole hotel floors, killing people in the street in Beirut. This guy's a bloodthirsty monster. And Trump's allied with him, tooth and nail allied with him.
Donald Trump, in his last, post on Truth Social, he said, without the United States, NATO is a paper tiger. They didn't want to join the fight to stop a nuclear-powered Iran. Now that fight is military. He's talking about militarily won. He's talking about that the United States won the war and with very little danger from them. And then he goes on and talking about the Strait of Hormuz and calling Europeans coward and because they're not joining the United States. And he's somehow begging for the help of Europeans. But after all, Larry, militarily, what do they have to bring to the table? Because Donald Trump is somehow feeling if they join, that would be the end.
Yeah. Well, apart from the fact that they have limited military capability, why do they need to bring anything to the table? It's over. He's won. I mean, again, this is the disconnect in the logic. If you've really achieved this glorious victory that you claim to have achieved, then why do you need anybody else, man? Take the victory lap yourself. So it's just, it's just one further reminder of his detachment from reality and his inability to recognize that he's saying irrational things, enabled by a group of sycophants like Stephen Miller and Scott Bessent and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth. God, it is a recipe for disaster. I don't know if we can point to another period in history where the leader of a nation has been so detached from reality and so, I guess, Adolf Hitler. Hitler is actually the last one to be this out of touch with what was actually happening on the ground militarily, and explaining it and vocally expressing the fact that we're winning, we're victorious. And I don't make the Hitler comparison lightly. I mean, sometimes that is so grossly overused. But my God, we're seeing right now the president of the United States making decisions based on either false information, or the truth is out there. He just ignores it. It pretends that he didn't hear that. And we saw that last year when Tulsi Gabbard initially said, no, Iran's not building a nuke. And when Trump was questioned about, your director of national intelligence said they're not building a nuke, he goes, I don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Right there. There you have it.
And what an embarrassment she was, especially under the very excellent questioning of John Ossoff of Georgia.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment she is. She doesn't even know the law. She doesn't even know that she's lying to her teeth, I'm sure through ignorance, that the president only makes these decisions and determines what's good intelligence and bad intelligence. That's a violation of everything that the 1947 National Security Act and amendments thereto since, including the amendment that established the DNI. It's a violation of everything that she doesn't know her job. She doesn't know the position she's in, and she doesn't know the position Trump's in either. And one other thing, I imagine Kane has been telling some things to Hegseth, who has been maybe guardedly giving them to Trump. I don't know, but it may be just coming from the Pentagon. When we did the massive reorganization after we cut the military by about 25% in 1990, 91, 92, 93, and then a little bit afterwards, we shopped out many things. We had done it beforehand to an extent, but we really shopped them out after that. And what do I mean by that? I mean that mine countermeasures, subsea, surface, and air were shopped out to the allies in Europe. Ice breaking was shopped out to the allies in Europe. Every time we would do a coordinated joint exercise, combined exercise in this case, they would do those functions. And we would monitor those functions and say, yeah, that was good. Oh, no, you need to do this. You need to whatever. In other words, we did share with our allies things that we didn't want to spend much money on and didn't want to do, particularly because they weren't in our, shall we say, expertise. We didn't do them particularly well or whatever. And maybe the Norwegians did, maybe the Brits did, and so forth. I imagine there's some of that right now about mine countermeasures. And that's really what's got the Pentagon irritated about not having the allies participate, because they do have some very sophisticated mine countermeasure capabilities. Just one case in point. We have ships that were, most of them anyway, total wrecks in terms of what they were designed for. One of them even came off the waves built by Lockheed Martin and broke in half the minute it came off the slide and went in the water. We had to do something with those ships. We'd spent a lot of money on them, so we took a few of them and created minesweepers out of them. They're very awkward minesweepers. Some of them have, for example, metallic hulls. A minesweeper that's up to date has a laminated plastic hull. So, you don't become your own worst enemy while you're sweeping. So that might be behind some of this angst about the European allies. I don't think it would make any difference, even if they joined, because I think the Iranians have the upper hand. It is their ocean, it is their sea, it is their coastline, and they are quite well armed to protect that coastline. So I think it's a moot point, but that might be why Hegseth, at least, and Kane might be a little bit irritated at the allies.
Well, let me just add, we don't have any functioning minesweepers right now. Yeah, so we're out. The greatest military in the world is out of minesweepers.
And when we did this in 88 and 89, and believe me, some of that gear's still around, like the towed things that the helicopters bring through.
Right.
We had a real problem. We almost lost 2 of our own mine countermeasure ships because we screwed up. So it's not an expertise you maintain on a routine basis. You may practice it once a year, and your equipment's sort of the same way too. You don't really use it that much. And when you have allies who do it in the combined exercises, you don't have to.
You know, since you both mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, we remember when she was chosen by the Trump administration to be part of the administration. Everybody was somehow happy about Tulsi Gabbard, but she's just, the transformation of Tulsi Gabbard is just amazing. Being Democrats, then Republican, then coming, to the Trump team. And right now she's destroying each and every credit she had before. And here is what, Congressman Castro was asking him legitimate questions about the war against Iran. Here is what she said.
The death and destruction continues. The economic cost to the United States, to Israel, to the Gulf states, and to the world continues to increase. So I want to ask you, to the best of your knowledge, do you know whether Israel is supportive of the president's call to make a deal with Iran?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know Israel's position on that.
And to what do you attribute Israel's decision to strike Iranian energy infrastructure, despite President Trump's call to keep those facilities off limits?
I don't have an answer for that.
So they ignored the president. Do you agree with that?
I'm not privy to any of their deliberations or what went into their calculus in launching this or other attacks. We are not involved with in the operational element of this. We're providing continuously on a daily basis the intelligence assessments of the events that are occurring. And
I guess I know the FBI can't because they're domestic, but can anybody else at the table provide any insight into that?
I guess I'm not sure what the question you're asking, Congressman Castro. I guess a couple of things. The goals that the president set out are clearly defined. The DNI related those. What was not included is a goal of the U.S.
Well, Director, let me start with this. Let me start with this question. You asked what my question is. Let me reclaim my time, Director. Come on. Do you know why Israel decided to strike that infrastructure despite the fact that the president said it should be off limits?
I wouldn't speak for Israel.
What do you guys know? We're at war. What do you guys know?
We'll have to take that for the record.
Yeah.
Let me just quickly say.
Go ahead.
And I don't want to go too far with this, but we knew through the NSA every single conversation virtually that was taking place during the war in Iraq. The second one. Well, probably the first one too, but I wasn't that close to it in the first one. I went to the freaking briefings in the second one. We knew what Germany was saying, what France was saying, what Israel was saying, what Saddam Hussein was saying, what Turkey was saying. Every day we knew, okay? So they're sitting there either unaware of the capacity and capabilities they have, or they're freaking lying. We spied on the Israelis all the time, and they on us.
Larry, what do you make of the position that Tulsi Gabbard is in right now? Because we have the head of, the director of counterterrorism, Joe Kent, resigning from his position because he doesn't agree with Donald Trump and the new policies toward the new war in the Middle East. And you see Tulsi Gabbard somehow trying to facilitate or trying to do whatever she can do to support Donald Trump. And you see Joe Kent. How do you see the fracture that is happening within the administration? Do you think that's going to happen again and again, or Joe Kent is going to be the first and the last one coming out of the administration?
Well, judging by how Joe is being treated, both by the media as well as many of his former colleagues, there's little incentive for anybody to want to come forward and be essentially a whistleblower, which is what he is. This is what he did is so rare. Go back to the first Gulf War, the second, the March 2003 attack on Iraq. Nobody resigned. Nobody stood up and said, "No, we are attacking Iraq for no good reason."
Colonel Enright. Don't forget Colonel Enright.
Yeah. Well, yes. Okay. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah. So, but it's rare. It's very rare. And Tulsi dishonored herself. She took an oath to the Constitution, not to Donald Trump, and she's betrayed that oath. And I don't know if it's because for money or the attention or just to join being in the powerful position, but she sits atop as the coordinator for all of the intelligence community in terms of producing intelligence for the president to make sure he's got the most accurate picture of what's going on. And instead of her being a truth teller, she's a political spinmeister. It's shameful.
Nima, let me just make one comment. I think I disagree a little bit with what Larry just said, and let me tell you why. I think we're going to see people, I don't know that Joe Kent is a leader of this sort of thing, for example, but I think we're going to see people like Vance, maybe even Rubio, and certainly a layer of people underneath them who are going to start abandoning ship because they know if they stay, they have no future whatsoever. And I'd put Vance at the top of that list. And I'd go back to Pence and say, regardless of what you think of Mike Pence, he at least had a viable political career and he had a career still to go. Murdered him being Trump's vice president in the first term. So I think some people, I don't know what Vance is going to do because he's trapped. In many ways, he's trapped.
Yeah.
He's probably thinking right now, God, why did I accept this position? Probably sending notes to Peter Thiel and saying, why did you mislead me? But there are going to be some people who are going to try to salvage their future prospects. It's going to be mostly young people and maybe in the second and third layer. But I think they're going to start leaving.
Yeah, I know that there was a meeting Monday night with Tulsi, Joe Kent, and J.D. Vance. And what was told to me was that they were using Kent as a way to try to wake Trump up. Now, if you noticed in Kent's conversation with Tucker Carlson, he was very careful to not attack Trump, to not, to speak very complimentary of Trump. Now that anybody that's read Schopenhauer knows that that's the technique and tactic you use when dealing with a corrupt narcissist. You sort of flatter them and make it think that it's their idea. But even with, and what was the other thing that was fascinating out of the conversation was Kent, before he left, he had a one-on-one with Trump, had a conversation with Trump. And no matter what, and in that setting, Trump's very solicitous and he's kind. But, when Kent's not sitting there, Trump is just brutal and insulting. So, I'm hoping Colonel Wilkerson's correct, that there will be others who will follow. But, as we've seen with here's Joe Kent, and they're talking about the FBI investigating him for leaks. So everybody's got to sit down and weigh the cost. If I do this, sort of like Edward Norton, I got to get the hell out of the country. And not many are willing to make that sacrifice.
That was done to put the fear of God in future ones, that's for sure.
Yep.
Carl, we know that before the war happening, the Trump administration increased the defense budget to by $600 billion. And then lately, after, mostly a period of time of 3 weeks of this war with Iran, they come out with new budget, and they're talking about $200 billion more. And it's going to simply double the budget they had before. It was 900 plus 900. And here is what Pete Hegseth said about that.
And dollars, I think that number could move. Obviously, it takes money to kill bad guys. So we're going back to Congress and our folks there to ensure that we're properly funded for what's been done, for what we may have to do in the future. Ensure that our ammunition everything's refilled, and not just refilled, but above and beyond. I mean, President Trump, as he said, rebuilt the military in his first term. Didn't think he'd use it as dynamically in his second, but he had. So thank goodness he did that. And an investment like this is meant to say, hey, we'll replace anything that was spent. And now that we're reviving our defense industrial base and rebuilding the arsenal of freedom and cutting deals like our great deputy secretaries here is doing, long lead times on exquisite munitions, we're going to be refilled faster than anyone imagined. And I think, we're also still dealing with the environment that Joe Biden created, which was depleting those stockholds and not sending them to our own military, but to Ukraine, which is every time we reach back and look at any sort of a challenge we have, it goes back to, send it to Ukraine. Ultimately, we think this should be these munitions are better spent in our own interests at this point, and this kind of funding bill is going to ensure that we're properly funded going forward.
Yeah, but there are reports that the United States is burning through cruise missiles. Carl, your understanding?
There were so many lies in that, I don't know where to start. The last one, of course, about Biden. Biden actually did something to plus up some of the more critical categories of munitions that we were not watching very closely. And it didn't all go to Ukraine. Wouldn't have anything right now if it did. And what Pete Hegseth has done in 14, 15 months is probably infinitesimal in terms of the long lead time you need to do these things. So it's just full of lies. A $200 billion supplemental only makes sense because I know what we do in the Pentagon when we start any kind of kinetic activity. The first thing you do is put that supplemental over there, even if you don't need it. And I'll tell you right now, they cannot spend the money they've got right now fruitfully. It is so bad that much of the money is being lost to what I'll call the poisonous ways that they have to distribute the money in the rapidity they have to distribute it in order to make sure that it doesn't go away. It's kind of like running out at the end, and you just put everything in. They are spending money on things right now that are not going to prove very effective and probably are going to prove just full of graft and stealing because they're going so rapidly. And they, not Biden, they have disassembled all the checks and balances in the Pentagon, ostensibly and allegedly because he wants things to move fast. He wants, as he puts it, the technology to get into the field before it's obsolete. Well, that's a nice thing to say, but when you eliminate testing, evaluation, analysis, oversight, and everything else, guess what the contractors are going to do to you? What they've done since time immemorial: rip your ass off.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's just lying. He's lying through his teeth.
Well, the other thing he's also ignoring is because of Trump's brilliant trade strategy. The Chinese have cut off the supply of rare earth minerals and gallium, which are critical components in many of the weapon systems and supporting systems like radars. Notice that they have yet to be able to build and install the radars in the nose cone of the F-35s because of the lack of those materials out of China. And those aren't going to show up anytime soon. So no matter, let's just assume that you could actually build a factory that was automated that could produce, say, PAC-3 missiles by, turn them out 100 a day as opposed to 100 every 2 months. They still wouldn't be able to do it because they don't have some of the critical raw materials because China's holding them back.
And if you know anything about defense production in wartime, Neiman, you know that you got to go minimum to 2 shifts. And if you're really going balls to the wall, you got 3 shifts, 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day. Where are you going to get the workforce? Where are you going to get the skilled workforce? Because more and more these weapons take a skilled workforce, even if it's mostly automated. Take the Tomahawk production line, for example. One of the reasons they couldn't increase Tomahawk for the Navy was because they didn't have the skilled workers to do it. And look at our submarine fleet. Our submarine fleet is now so far behind on both classes, ballistic missile and attack, that by law, the program should be canceled. Congress says if this happens, cancel the program. Well, it's happened in both the Columbia and I forget the class for the attack, Virginia class or something like that. But in both of those classes, they both should be canceled. The only reason they're not is because they're utterly essential to our defense and our security. And they know that in the contracting business. But one of the reasons is we don't have a workforce. We couldn't go to 3 shifts. We couldn't go to 2 shifts. We don't have the workforce.
Larry, does it mean that the United States has to produce everything for the United States and for Israel? And Israel, what do we know about the capabilities of Israel providing, cruise missiles, whatever they need for their fighter jets?
Well, Israel has its own production facilities for, I think, the missiles used in David Sling and in their Iron Dome. but those are not, particularly those air defense systems aren't designed to take out the ballistic missiles, which Iran is using. And similarly, they are not industrially equipped to produce on the scale that, say, China does. So this is much, I would argue that much of the military industrial infrastructure in the United States and in Israel is really designed for 20th century warfare, not designed for 21st century warfare. And what I mean by that is, in a way, it's like Back to the Future. In 1941, 42, when the U.S. industrial plants started pushing out massive quantities of planes and jeeps and tanks, rapidly building ships, they at least had the infrastructure and the materials needed in order to produce those items. We're still sort of geared on that model, except we don't have the supply chains and we don't have the working force, and also the incentives that are built into some of these contracts. Lockheed Martin found they could make more money by having PAC-3 missiles built by hand as opposed by robot.
Yeah.
So when your defense industry, this is what really separates the Russian and Chinese defense industries from that of the West. Though they are not, the Chinese and Russian systems are not profit driven. They are not subject to shareholders who want to make more money. And they are, in fact, beholden to the government to meet what the government says are the needed, what are the requirements, what they need to fight on the battlefield. And in the case of this is why that the U.S. defense budget is at least twice the size of the defense budget that Russia and China combined have.
Yep.
I mean, just think about this. It's ridiculous. So the for-profit system actually ends up undermining our ability to defend ourselves.
And the grifters in the system are parcel of it.
Yeah.
I mean, China gets, I read an analysis recently that I think is fairly accurate. China gets about 2.5 times bang for its buck as we do. And I don't know but the answer to this, Larry. Maybe you do. Are Israel's production facilities underground?
No. I think they're mostly above ground.
So they may be taking a pounding too.
Yeah. Well, no, they've been hit. And again, it goes back to the arrogance because they assume that their Iron Dome and their David Sling would be so effective that Iran couldn't touch them. And now they discovered last June that they could be touched, and you can't move everything underground in that short period of time.
Yeah. Carl, here is what the NATO Secretary General said about helping the United States in the war.
Ruta.
Contacts with allies all over NATO territory. What I'm sensing and hearing is that we all agree, as we always did, that it was crucial for Iran not to get its hands on a nuclear capability, a ballistic missile capability, and what the US is doing at the moment is degrading that capability of Iran. And I think that's very important. This is important for European security, for the Middle East. It is vital for Israel itself. Then when it comes to the Hormuz Strait, everybody agrees. This strait cannot stay closed. It has to open up again as soon as possible. This is crucial for world economy. In my context with allies are seeing is that they are intensely discussing amongst each other with the United States and amongst each other the best way forward to tackle this huge security issue. And let me add to that, that I'm confident that allies, as always, will do everything in support of our shared interest.
Yeah, I'm not confident. I'm not the least bit confident. I don't think he speaks for Macron and Starmer and Merz and a host of other leaders. I just don't think he does. That has always been, I don't know that he realizes he's demonstrating it, but that has always been our principal objection to NATO. They talk. Whether you go back to Serbia, you go back to some of the other little conflicts that we've had since World War II, and it's always talk, but it's very seldom action. So generally what you get is you get us peeling out a country here, and making a, what did Donald Rumsfeld call them? Coalition of the willing. Because you can't ever get the alliance. It's not threatened sufficiently to wake it up to a real threat. And Iran's not a real threat. Why should they wake up to it? I mean, maybe the Strait of Hormuz being closed is a significant threat, but who did that?
Right.
Larry, Iran is defining a new sort of mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz. And that's going to be for the years to come. It's not just for the time being. And how do you see they're talking about the strait is closed. It's not closed. The strait is open, and they're selecting who can use it, who can pass through the strait. They had Chinese, Indian, Iraqi, and even Malaysian tankers, passing through, but none from the Europe and from the United States or other countries. And how do you see the Strait of Hormuz being one of the main reasons for the whole countries, for all of these countries in the Middle East to come together and define a new security architecture for the region without the United States?
Well, let's go back to what Joe Kent said in his interview with Tucker, because I was struck by it. He suggested that one of the conditions that Iran would have to agree to if this war is ended and a negotiated settlement is that all future purchases of oil will be in U.S. dollars, the petrodollar. So Kent even understood that, part of what is driving this war, part of what was driving the U.S. to attack Iran is to try to destroy BRICS and try to disrupt the economic restructuring that's taking place in the world right now. So what is Iran doing? They're in business now with China. I like, we should play as background music, the song "Taking Care of Business Every Day," because the Iranians are saying, "Hey, Pakistan, you want that oil to come out? Sure, pay for it in yuan. You give us, we get 10%, and you're free to go." Same for India. Everybody's got to pay in yuan, and apparently Xi Jinping just announced within the last day or two that he would like actually to see the yuan become an international reserve currency.
Yes.
Boy.
Wrote it in a manifesto.
Yeah. So now we know what this is, the battle of the Titans. The city of London with the United States trying to preserve the primacy of the dollar, and the Russians and the Chinese, now the Iranians, doing everything they can to destroy the primacy of the dollar.
Which brings me to a comment I made yesterday and will continue to make. I think the powers behind the throne are really engaged with that objective with regard to this war. They want to stop China.
Colonel, here is what Scott Bessent said about this situation of the Strait of Hormuz and the consequences of that.
A break the glass plan across the administration and at Treasury. We unsanctioned Russian oil. We knew that there were about 130 million barrels on the water, and we created supply that is beyond the Straits of Hormuz. So we anticipated this. We knew that there could be a temporary, and I want to emphasize temporary, choke point there, and there was 130 million barrels of floating storage. In the coming days, we may unsanction the Iranian oil that's on the water. It's about 140 million barrels. So depending on how you count it, that's 10 days to 2 weeks of supply that the Iranians had been pushing out. That would have all gone to China. In essence, we will be using the Iranian barrels against the Iranians to keep the price down for the next 10 or 14 days as we continue this campaign.
Let's see you do that, Scott. That'd be my first comment. My second comment would be, okay, Putin's up to 150 million a day windfall profits now, probably 200 million before the month is out. And you're doing all this on the high seas. You want a global war? You want to start a world war? Keep on. I understand that we now finally have the Russians' gruesome cojones. We finally have a tanker headed for Havana. At least that's where people whom I talk to about this think it's headed. And it's got enough to relieve some of the real problems in Cuba right now. Going to be really interesting to see what Donald Trump does when he finds out, if he hasn't already, that this is the case. If it is, we could stumble into a global conflict very easily here.
Yeah, I don't know how prepared is that. Are they? Because it seems that they were not prepared for the war with Iran to continue to be somehow to drag on. And right now,
you remember how that video about 3 days ago of Scott Bessent being interrupted and having to go off stage and then coming back, and he was contacted by the president off stage. I don't know if the president was in the wings or if he just called him or whatever, but unprecedented. He had to get up in the middle of his talk and go off stage. And when he came back, he was visibly shaken. I think that's because the president told him he just got off the phone with Putin and lifted some of the sanctions, because that was Scott Bessent's pet pig, was sanctions on Russia. So this is changing everything that they were doing, and they're playing a pickup game with the world as at stake in order to deal with it. And oh, by the way, why was our strategic petroleum reserve allowed to go below 500 million barrels down to 415 million on Trump's watch when Trump had said during the campaign that he would make sure it was topped off and plus that? And he's tapped it again. So we're creating some problems, big problems for the world and for ourselves. And we're courting not just the renminbi taking over the dollar's role in the global economy. We're courting a war with China, not over Taiwan, not in the South China Sea. We're courting a war that would start probably with submarines all around the world. And by the way, China and Russia together match us or overmatch us in terms of both nuclear submarines, effective torpedoes, quiet, silent diesel submarines. Someone said to me the other day, how could they send a diesel submarine? I said, dude, you ever looked at our campaigns in the Pacific where we left Pearl and went to the Straits of Formosa, now the Taiwan Straits, and sank Japanese shipping and came back? Those were diesel electric, dude. They have long legs. By the way, we don't have any of those. Not a single one.
Larry, is Donald Trump empowering BRICS from within?
To an extent, but they've also had some success in trying to weaken BRICS, or at least success early on. And I think that's reversing. You know, I know our good friend Pepe Escobar has been, somewhat in despair over the behavior of India. But, India really painted itself into a corner. Yeah. Modi's effort to go out and side with the Israelis, and a lot of that what's driving Modi is just anti-Muslim prejudice. So he caters to the Hindu view and hates the Muslims. But it's now at a huge cost, not just political cost, economic cost. But so oil that India was buying from Russia at $55 a barrel, that's gone. It's now paying at least $90 a barrel. So that its energy costs have doubled, which means the inflation rate in India is going to go through the roof. I mean, inflation, global inflation is going to be a reality for everybody, with the exception, well, even in Russia, but it's not going to hurt Russia because, as Colonel Wilkerson said, they're rolling in dough. This is, Putin is the big winner out of this whole misadventure by the West, because they control oil, they control liquid natural gas, they control major quantities of it, as well as fertilizer. They are the largest. Were and are the largest producer of fertilizer. Now, they're the only girl at the Sadie Hawkins dance.
Yeah,
they get to choose who they want to dance with and who they don't want to dance with, and the rest of the world is lined up like said, "Oh, please let me be your partner," except Europe so far. But the time's coming that Europe's going to have to cave on that. You saw how quickly Trump. And they caved on this notion of we're going to use sanctions. We're sanctioning Russia. We're sanctioning Iran. And they even said, yeah, we're going to lift the sanctions on Iran so they can sell oil. So this isn't about some deep-seated, we got to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, or we got to stop Iran from killing its protesters. Bullshit. This is about money. And the U.S. wants to control it, and it's losing control of it. That's what this whole thing is ultimately all about.
Bingo. And Europe just bought the entire complement of Russian Arctic LNG. The entire complement. They passed a law in 2022. They passed a law, but it wouldn't go into effect for 5 years. January 27th is when it goes into effect. And they just violated the spirit of that law anyway. And she said, it was, what's her name? She said, well, in January, we'll stop buying it. Right. In a pig's ass, you will.
Well, I wonder, if Russia's going to declare force majeure and say, we're not going to sell to you. We got these other people we need to service. Because because they just, the friggin' Europeans just they seized another Russian tanker in the Mediterranean, and I
where beauty meets practicality. From timeless tablecloths to refined table runners and playful placemats, our table collection was designed.
I don't see the Russians sitting back and saying, "Oh well, no big deal." I think they're going to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah, so do I. I think we have a prospect on the high seas, at a minimum, of widening this war seriously.
Larry, you, Colonel, and I were talking about the case of Charlie Kirk. Various sessions we had talking about what has happened. Finally, we have someone who has some sort of information, who knows better, which is Joe Kent. He had an interview with Tucker Carlson. He somehow addressed what has happened and, with the case of Charlie Kirk. Here is what he said.
Charlie Kirk is killed publicly in a very horrific way, and we're not really even allowed to look into that at all. And Charlie Kirk was one of President Trump's closest advisors, and he also advocated heavily against a war with Iran. He was in the Oval Office in the lead up to the 12-day war. I wasn't particularly close with Charlie. He was very gracious to me when I was running for Congress, very, very supportive. So we knew each other. And the last time I saw Charlie Kirk on this earth was in June in the West Wing, in the stairway. And I said hi to him, and he looked me in the eye, and he said very loudly, and it's a small, you've been in the West Wing, it's small, it's a tight space. And he said, "Joe, stop us from getting into a war with Iran," very loudly.
He was single-minded.
And he walked off, and he went, I believe, into the Oval. So when one of President Trump's closest advisors, who is vocally advocating for us to not go to war with Iran and for us to rethink at least our relationship with the Israelis, and then he's suddenly publicly assassinated, and we're not allowed to ask any questions about that. It's a data point. It's a data point that we need to look into.
What do you mean when you say we're not allowed to ask any questions about that?
We've been told that this individual, Robinson, is a lone gunman, and maybe he is. But the investigation that I was a part of, the National Counterterrorism Center was a part of, we were stopped from continuing to investigate. And the FBI will say that they stopped that because they wanted to have turn everything over to the Utah state authorities. Everything's going to trial. It's very, very sensitive. But there was still a lot for us to look into that I can't really get into. But there was still linkage for us to investigate that we needed to run down. And I'm not making any conclusions. I'm not saying
no, I don't think you are.
Because of this happened. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's unanswered questions. We know the pressure because of the text messages that have been made public, that Charlie was under a lot of pressure from a lot of pro-Israel donors. And again, we know Charlie was advocating to President Trump against this war with Iran.
Yeah. Hey, look, the first American politician that Israel participated in the assassination of was John F. Kennedy. Israel attacked the USS Liberty, and there is compelling circumstantial evidence that people connected with Israel and working with others, perhaps the French as well, killed Charlie Kirk. So this is, the notion that this Tyler Robinson was, quote, the lone gunman, please. The rifle that he was alleged to have used would have torn Charlie's head off. The neck would have, if that had been fired from that rifle, the neck would have fully exploded. The head would have been separated from the body. So this was something. This was an unusual round that was shot, which suggests something very, a sophisticated assassination attempt. And just one other point that again, people don't think this through operationally. How do you do something? If you're going to take a shot at 140 yards, you've got to make sure that your rifle is zeroed. Number one. Number two, how do you know where to take the shot from? Because it wasn't this kid, Tyler Robinson, supposedly had never been to this campus before. So we're supposed to believe that he just walked around and said, "Oh, that spot looks good." And he climbed up there and figured out that his best way to escape was to run and jump off the roof? No. These things, you do surveillance beforehand, you do reconnaissance beforehand, and you put a plan together. How do you get in there? What do you need to do to make sure you can get a weapon into a particular position? How do you get away? What's the escape plan? Robinson had none of those capabilities of planning. This was a sophisticated operation, one that Israel is quite capable of.
And I'd say the only thing they haven't done that would be similar to the JFK assassination is they haven't had a Jack Ruby walk into the jail cell and kill Robinson.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up this session, yesterday Netanyahu said something about Jesus and comparing Jesus to Genghis Khan, and it was so much, the repercussions are just blowing, just exploding out there. But here is what he said, and many people are criticizing Netanyahu because these sort of comments are not, good after all. But he's making these comments. Let's look at what he said.
Unfortunately and unhappily, Jesus Christ has no advantage over Genghis Khan. Because if you are strong enough, ruthless enough, powerful enough, evil will overcome good. Aggression will overcome moderation.
Oh, he's living testimony to the truth of that. Bibi is.
Yeah, so just when you think the guy's smart, for him to say something that abjectly stupid and offensive to Christians, but we know that these Jews in Israel, the Zionists, they hate Christians, and any Jew, because Jesus was a Jew, any Jew that converts to Christianity and tries to return to Israel as supposedly the right of return of Jews, they're not allowed. They're prohibited because they're no longer considered a Jew. They're a Christian. So this animosity towards Christians, and then you get these idiots within the Christian community who claim to be Christians, but they're Christian Zionists. Jesus' message was quite simple on several fronts. He overcame evil with good. He rose from the dead. All the evil that was done to him to try to destroy him couldn't, they say, can't keep a good man down. They couldn't keep a good man in the tomb. And the resurrection of Jesus was one that said no longer was salvation only to one special group of people who claim that we're the special chosen ones of God. No, Jesus came out and said, you know what? Salvation is for everyone.
And Bibi Netanyahu has no idea what the Genghis Khan would have done or said if he met Jesus Christ. After all, Constantine let him take over his empire.
Thank you so much, Carl and Larry, for being with us today.
Long war of attrition and the consequence. In a few more months, experts are predicting a food shortage, meaning that nations will be forced into food rationing. And today, there's a major escalation in that the Israelis struck the largest gas field in Iran, and Iran retaliated by attacking energy infrastructure of the GCC. And Iran has stated that its purpose, its goal, its strategy is to move oil to $200 a barrel, which will have a really significant impact on the global economy because the entire global economy is based on access to cheap energy. So unfortunately, I think that we can expect this war to drag on for years and years. Eventually, America will send in ground troops. Eventually, the Strait of Hormuz will be contested. Eventually, this will spread all across the world. Eventually, other nations will be drawn in. So Saudi Arabia is thinking about declaring war on Iran. And Saudi Arabia has a mutual defense pact with Pakistan. So Pakistan will be drawn into this war. So things are spiraling out of control. And just recently, Ali Larijani, who is the de facto head of the Iranian war effort, was assassinated. And he was a pragmatic elder statesman in Iran who had the authority to negotiate a ceasefire. Now that he's gone, there really is no more off-ramp. So both sides are committed to a long war of attrition, and the consequences for the entire global economy are quite dire.
That is, I wouldn't say that's the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario would include a nuclear strike by one or more actors and the destruction of the Aqsa Mosque complex in Jerusalem, which would spark a religious war. So that's as bad as it could get, but you've just described one step before the worst, which is protracted, destructive, impossible to stop. So my question is, because there are so many global players, big global players, the US and China, I think, who would be hurt by this, why is there not an incentive to get it settled quickly, and why can't that happen?
Right. So once this war starts, it achieves a momentum and a logic of its own. So the United States doesn't really have an off-ramp, meaning that if it tries to negotiate a ceasefire with Iran, Iran would ask for reparations, about $1 trillion, basically. It would ask for the United States to leave the Middle East permanently to ensure its long-term survival. If the United States were to do that, then the GCC nations would collectively become client states of Iran, because only Iran can guarantee their safety, as well as use of the Strait of Hormuz. The GCC is the basis of the petrodollar. So what the GCC does is it sells oil in US dollars and then recycles this money back into the American economy. So if the GCC were to abandon the petrodollar, then this would have severe repercussions on the American economy. Also, there'd be a chain reaction in that Japan and South Korea would look at what's happened in the Middle East and decide that the United States can no longer guarantee their safety. So they would have to remilitarize, and they would have to spend all the resources on adapting to the possible China threat. And then you have Europe, and then Europe would look at what happened in the GCC as well as in Southeast Asia, and they would be like, why are we fighting Russia? Wouldn't it be in our best interest to negotiate a peace treaty with Russia as soon as possible? What this would mean the collapse of the US dollar as a global reserve currency. Remember that America is sitting on $39 trillion in debt. And so the American economy is a Ponzi scheme that relies on foreign nations to continually buy US dollars. So the US economy would not be able to withstand essentially American withdrawal from the Middle East. So the Americans are stuck where they are right now, unfortunately.
What is the Chinese perspective on this? I mean, it seems like China has an interest in peace in the Persian Gulf with those 7 oil-producing countries. Why wouldn't China step in and try and settle this?
So both the United States and China benefit from the status quo. And China has a vested interest in seeing a very quick solution to this war in the Middle East. China imports about 40% of its energy needs from the GCC. So not just Iranian oil, but also Qatari natural gas.
Right.
So as you point out, China very much wants to see, as soon as possible, a ceasefire. Unfortunately, it is the nature of the Chinese government not to interfere in foreign affairs. China doesn't really have a geopolitical framework, a grand strategy. It really believes in global trade. And it doesn't really have a framework for how to resolve armed conflict. And so Chinese policymakers are really stuck. And in fact, Chinese policymakers have come out publicly saying that they would like the carnage, the violence in the Middle East to stop as soon as possible, and for the Strait of Hormuz to open up. But unfortunately, as I pointed out previously, when a war starts, it achieves a momentum and a logic of its own. And it's very hard to stop a war once it starts.
So if your prediction is correct, and I pray that it's not, and I'm sure you do too, hope that you're wrong. But if you're not wrong, and this continues to grind in the way that it is now, destroying energy infrastructure, just really destroying the civilizations of the region and Iran and the GCC, what does that look like in, say, 2 years globally? What's the effect on the global economy?
Right. So this war, it will accelerate three major trends. And nations will have to adapt to a new reality in which energy is no longer cheap and accessible. The first major trend is deindustrialization, meaning that right now you just have too many people living in cities. And you can do that as long as you can import cheap energy and cheap food. But when cheap energy and cheap food are gone, then you need people to work the fields, to grow food for your economy. So you have to deindustrialize and reduce your energy dependence. Okay, that's one major trend that we should see very soon. Second major trend we should see is remilitarization, in that before we had Pax Americana, where America basically guaranteed global peace. And America basically prevented nations from going to war against each other. So, for example, Trump brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan because these two nations have much hostilities against each other. But now that America no longer has the aura of invincibility and inability, now that the American military does not come across as almighty, then America doesn't have the power to stop kids from attacking each other on the playground anymore. So nations have to remilitarize, especially nations like Japan, which before relied too heavily on American military protection. Okay, so that's number two, the remilitarization of the world. And the third major trend we should see is mercantilism, meaning that now that global trade is disrupted, nations, especially advanced industrial nations such as Japan and Germany, they need to create their own independent, self-sufficient supply chains. Fortunately, America doesn't have this issue because the Western Hemisphere is extremely wealthy and abundant in natural resources. But if you are Japan and Germany, then you have to reach out and expand your borders if you are to maintain your industrial might. So these are the three major trends we should be seeing very quickly.
Well, here's something that thieves count on. Security cameras usually stop where Wi-Fi stops, right? Makes sense. So if you've got a barn, a job site, equipment, nuclear-armed power, rising power, a great power like China, just kind of intuitively demands hegemony in its own region. Like China controls the East. I would imagine that's the Chinese perspective, but in the way of that are Japan, the historic enemy, and South Korea, but particularly Japan. And I know that people in your country are very focused on Japan. So is it plausible that China allows Japan to become, say, a nuclear-armed power at this point?
Right. So from the surface, it seems as though Japan has a lot of structural weaknesses. Okay. So, for example, it has an aging population. It has the oldest population in the world. That's a huge constraint on the future growth potential of Japan. Another problem for Japan is that it is resource dependent. It relies on imports for its resources. And Taiwan blocks off the Strait of Malacca, right? Because Japan requires most of its energy from the GCC through the Strait of Malacca, and Taiwan will be a barrier. So if Taiwan were to reunify with China, then basically Japan can be blockaded. and they could be starved. And the other major issue with Japan is its economy, where for the past 30 years, it's in a deflationary spiral because of its excessive debt burden. So there are fundamental weaknesses to Japan. But I'm a historian and I study historical patterns. And what I've seen is that the Japanese people are incredibly resilient. You go back to the 13th century when the Mongols invaded not once, but twice. And at this time, Japan was very much a feudal nation divided into different fiefdoms. And they came together as a people to defeat the greatest empire in the world at that time, not once, but twice. And you go to the middle of the 19th century when China was being carved up by these Western industrial powers. And it seemed as though Japan was about to be carved up as well. But the Japanese engaged in something called the Meiji Restoration. And in 20 to 30 years' time, they went from a feudal backward nation into an industrial power that ultimately defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, right? And then you go to World War II, when America devastated Japan, not just nuclear strikes, but also the fire bombings.
Yes.
So at the end of World War II, Japan was completely devastated. But in like 20 years' time, in a generation, they became the world's greatest manufacturing power. So I would not count the Japanese out. There's something about their culture that is extremely resilient, extremely entrepreneurial. And I think that given crises, they will come together as a people and adapt to these challenges. And so if I were to bet, if you give me like $1 billion and said, in East Asia, you can invest your money either in China or Japan, or you could invest half and half. Well, Tucker, I'll be honest with you. I would invest all my money in Japan.
Revolutionary salute, Queen.
That's what a fascinating analysis. I agree with you. Intuitively, I agree with you, but I just wonder if China can tolerate that, given the history between the two countries and the focus. And just the growth of China, can they really allow right in the middle of East Asia a competing power?
Right. So the major issue with China is that it styles itself the Middle Kingdom, 中国, the Middle Kingdom,
yes.
Which is to say that the Chinese believe that they are a universe unto themselves. What happens outside China doesn't really impact China. So what's important is to maintain the national sovereignty of China because it is a self-sufficient nation that has absolutely no interest in the outside world. Japan is complete opposite in that it is an island and it requires it basically needs to extract resources from other nations in order to survive as a nation. So these are two very different mentalities where China is very much an agricultural, self-sufficient nation that is insular and conservative, and Japan is an outward-looking, seafaring nation.
Go ahead. Crank the volume. We got you. US.
Interesting. So it sounds like they can coexist, or you just said it. You're not betting against Japan. What about South Korea, which has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, birth rate in the world, in contrast to North Korea, and has basically modeled itself on the United States. I mean, down to the most basic level. The U.S. pulling back from East Asia that's going to be a transformative thing, I would think, for South Korea. What happens?
Yeah, South Korea is in a very precarious position, primarily because of North Korea. So once the United States is forced to withdraw from Southeast Asia, then North Korea can take the initiative. And the problem with this conflict is that Seoul, the largest city in South Korea, it's only 30 minutes away from North Korean artillery. So in like a whole day, North Korea could flatten Seoul. And so South Korea is in a very precarious position. Also, if you look at the economy of Seoul, of South Korea, it's a very ossified, very corrupt system where just a few companies control the entire economy. And this is what's led to intense competition in South Korea, which has led to the extremely low birth rate in South Korea. So South Korea is in a very precarious position. But what I will say about the South Koreans is that they are fanatical workers. They work really, really hard. And they have a long memory of colonial persecution. from both the Chinese and the Japanese. And these are fiercely independent people. So I would not be surprised if North Korea and South Korea were to come to a compromise at some point, because both nations aspire for national unification. And because China and Japan will be in conflict with each other, then the Korean people could actually navigate this conflict to their benefit.
That's very smart. I sense you're absolutely right about that. Let me just ask you about an observation you made parenthetically a second ago, which is because South Korea's economy is ossified and centralized, it's a monopoly economy, its birth rate is low. What's the connection between economic monopolies and low birth rate?
Yeah, great question. So when you have a monopoly, what you do is you create a hierarchy, right? Because everyone's trying to get into these companies because these companies are the most prestigious in South Korea. And South Korea is very much a Confucian culture where face is everything. So the problem, though, is how do you get into these companies? It's a very prestigious position where everyone's trying to get in, right? And so you usually get in through the college entrance examination, which allows you to get into a prestigious university, right? So if you are a South Korean couple, your strategy is either not to have children because you cannot afford to play this game, because you need to send your kid to cram schools, get the best tutors, basically focus all your resources on ensuring the child does well on the college examination so that he or she can get into Samsung. Or you can choose not to have any children because it's too expensive for you. But if you choose to have children, you can only choose to have one kid because it's much more strategic for you to put all your resources into one kid than to spread it over 3 or 4 kids. So that's why an economic monopoly would naturally lead to a low birth rate.
So what you're saying is intense competition for resources, scarce resources, produces an incentive that results in low birth rate.
Exactly, because everyone sees themselves as competitors against each other, and you lose a sense of community, right? Because you have a lot of children because you want to contribute to the community and grow as a nation. But when you see your neighbor as your enemy, then that reduces your incentive to have children.
Interesting. So what will be the economic effects on China and also on the rest of Asia and Southeast Asia, Philippines, Vietnam, if this energy crunch continues in the Middle East?
The reality is that this war in the Middle East is having a severe impact already on the entire Southeast Asian economy. So India imports about 60% of its oil from the GCC. Pakistan also imports a majority of its oil. Japan imports about 75% of its oil from the GCC. China imports about 40%. Okay, so all these economies are being impacted, and already Thailand, Vietnam are running out of fuel. And you go to a gas station, there's just no more fuel for your motorbike. And now people are being forced to work from home. There's fuel rationing. There's no jet fuel. So this is impacting all of Southeast Asia. So the question isn't like who will be impacted, because everyone's impacted. The question is who will be most resilient and the most willing to innovate and adapt to this new reality. Because we're not talking about short-term war. We're talking about a long-term change to the global economy. And I think that China will actually be the least resilient and the least ready to adapt to this new reality, because for the past 30, 40 years, China has gotten very wealthy because of the global economy, where it imports cheap energy and exports manufactured goods. And the entire Chinese economy is currently based on this model. Now, for the past 20 years, China has been moving towards a consumer-based economy and more of an innovation-based economy, AI. But unfortunately, AI itself is dependent on cheap energy. And Chinese consumers are refusing to spend money for a variety of reasons, primarily because they are not that optimistic about China's growth in the future. So Chinese household savings is about 40%. And unless the government is able to get Chinese to spend more money, then it'll be very hard for the Chinese economy to move towards a consumer-based economy. So all of Southeast Asia will be impacted, and I think China will be impacted the most in the long term. Maybe not in the short term, because China still has access to Iranian oil. Scott Bessent announced today that they will lift sanctions on Iranian oil. in order to make sure the global economy is not too impacted by this war. But in the long term, the Chinese economy, it is now much too focused on export and manufacturing in order to shift to a much more diversified economy.
Right. People seem to be more inflamed, not just emotionally, but physically, and more tired than ever. And food is part of the reason. Bad food. Just decide that you probably do inadvertently. How does this affect Africa?
Right. So with this war in Ukraine and with this war in the GCC, experts are saying that in the worst case scenario, you could have famine in Africa because so much of food and energy sustains the African economy. And
Yes.
so, yeah.
Okay, just moving west now. What about the GCC? What does that look like in 5 years?
Right. So unfortunately, the biggest loser of this war, regardless of how it turns out, okay, even if Americans were to win, the biggest loser is the GCC. Because for the past 30, 40 years, the GCC is basically built on a mirage because it's essentially a desert with very little access to fresh water and very little agriculture. And so it couldn't really sustain a large population. But with the petrodollar and with American military protection, then the GCC nations felt free to invest in technology that allowed them to grow their population, right? So these desalination plants, modern infrastructure. So you sort of saw this massive growth in Dubai, in Qatar, in Riyadh. And what this war has done is shattered this mirage and revealed the limitations of the GCC. So, for example, look at Dubai. So Dubai, for many years, has prided itself as this safe, very cosmopolitan, very open tax haven. So a lot of wealthy people immigrated to Dubai. But because of this war, and we're talking about like a few drones hitting hotels, it's really shattered the image of Dubai. And once you shatter this mirage, you can never, ever rebuild it again. So the idea of Dubai as like the future New York or London, the financial capital of the GCC, this mirage has evaporated.
Iran in 5 years?
So Iran is being devastated right now. So the Israelis and Americans are attacking critical infrastructure. So the Israelis attacked the largest gas field in Iran. The desalination plant was destroyed. But we also have to remember what is being hidden from us. And what's being hidden from us is the fact that the Israelis and Americans are trying to destroy the capacity of the state to govern the nation, basically destroy the state's monopoly on violence. And so what we're hearing are attacks on police officers, on military installations, and there's talk of special forces going into Iran and starting to fund dissident groups, right? Like the Kurds and the Palakis in southeast Iran. So no matter what happens in this war, it's going to be very hard for the government to maintain national control, even if they were to survive this war. And also another huge issue for Iran is that for the past few years, it suffered drought issues. So its agriculture was heavily impacted. They were actually talking about moving Tehran, like moving these millions of people out of the city of Tehran because the capital can no longer sustain this large population. So this war will only exacerbate these environmental issues, especially with the attacks on critical civilian infrastructure, for example, dams, reservoirs, desalination plants. And it's going to take years and years for Iran to recover from this war as a nation. And you have basically the stirring of ethnic settlements. You have the destruction of the state's capacity to deliver basic services. But the good news for Iran is that it seems as though they will be able to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz. And that is critical because now they're able to charge a toll on anyone who uses the Strait of Hormuz. And they talk about 10%, which should generate about $800 billion a year annually for Iran. So the nation will be destroyed in this war, but if it's able to harness the pride of the Persian people, if it's able to unify the Persian people, and it's able to leverage the resource of the Strait of Hormuz effectively, then we can expect Iran to rise again in like 10 to 20 years' time.
Where is Israel in a few years from now?
So if you look at the main beneficiary of this war, it is Israel, because Israel has an ambition called the Greater Israel Project, which is what they believe that their God, Yahweh, promised to their ancestor, Abraham. And so they believe that Yahweh promised Abraham all the land from the Nile in Egypt to Euphrates in Iraq. If you look at the entire map, it also extends to Anatolia, which is southern Turkey, and even into Saudi Arabia. So if you look at what's happening, well, it's convenient in that the GCC is being destroyed. Saudi Arabia will probably be drawn into this war. It is possible Turkey will be drawn into this war as well. And this war allows Israel to remake the Middle East in its own image. Also, if you think about it, according to game theory, the main constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America, because America guarantees the military safety and protection of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, these nations. And so if Israel is become dominant, it's become the hegemon of the Middle East, it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. And quite honestly, this war has shown the limitations of American power. It's really annoyed the American people. The American people do not want this war. And American people don't even understand why America is in the Middle East. And so it's very possible that regardless of what happens in this war, America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, in which case Israel is able to achieve its Greater Israel Project.
Standard security cameras cannot prevent break-ins. They can help catch burglars after they've done it, but that's a little late, no? It's simply safe.
Because Saddam Hussein basically gave up. He didn't have air defense because those economic sanctions had destroyed his economy. And his logic was this: let the Americans invade. They can't possibly invade because if they destroy us, that would make Iran, which has hostilities against America, the regional power. So why would America do this? It is self-defeating. It is not logical. It is not rational. So I'm not worried about them attacking me. And he was surprised when they did attack because it was not logical. It was not rational. But they did attack. And it was a cakewalk. It took about 2 weeks. America achieved air supremacy very quickly, and they rolled into Baghdad very, very quickly and toppled the regime. So that was a very quick and easy war that fit the American military doctrine of shock and awe. Iran is completely different. And the American military does not want to fight this war because they've war gamed this countless times. And each war game, they discover that they lose because the American military, it's too bulky. It's not as nimble and resilient as the Iranian military. And we're seeing that play out right now where you have these devastating carriers, Abraham Lincoln, Gerald Ford, threatening Iran, but not actually doing anything because they're afraid of getting too close to the coast of Iran because then they become susceptible to drone strikes as well as hypersonics. So the Iranians have been preparing this for 20 plus years. They know the entire American playbook, and they have the perfect strategy to counter the American playbook. So America will have a really tough time winning this war. The great problem, the big question now is, will America send in ground troops? Because once America sends in ground troops, then it becomes plot committed. It's mission creep, some cost fallacy. It'll be like Vietnam over. So right now there's talk of 2,500 Marines who've coming in from Okinawa. They'll be in the Middle East in about 7 days' time. And the rumor is, and I don't know, but the rumor is the intention is for them to take Targ Island, which is the main oil depot for Iran. So Iran exports 9% of its oil from that facility, the island. And if the Marines were to take it, it would be great optics. You know, Trump would look good on TV. It'd be a great boost for for American morale. The problem is that you can take it, but you can't hold it because it's too close to Iranian coast, and the Iranians can attack with artillery, with drones. Okay, which means that you now have to take on the coast. You have to occupy the coast and create a forward operating base. But then you're exposed to the Zagros Mountains, right? Which means that you're now forced to occupy the mountains as well. So it's mission creep. It's exactly like Vietnam, where in 1965, 3,000 Marines went into Da Nang to occupy an air base. And like 4 or 5 years later, you have 500,000 troops, right? So it started off as a very limited, self-defined mission, but then it just balloons. So America could find itself in the situation very quickly.
If you were the commander-in-chief of the United States, what would you do at this point as of today?
Commander-in-chief meaning Donald Trump?
Yeah. You get to make the decisions. What does America do next if it's acting in its own interest, if it's trying to preserve its power and wealth at this point? What does it do?
Well, first of all, I would acknowledge that all these events are interconnected, right? So this trade war of China, this war in Ukraine, this war in the Middle East, it's all interconnected because the American empire is too overstretched and it has its fingers on everything. And so it allows its enemies to provoke it into these never-ending wars. So what I would do is basically sit down everyone, okay, including Russia, China, Iran, and say, it's time for a new world order where we are partners in this relationship, right? Before America was the hegemon, before the US dollar was the world reserve currency. But now what we want to do is open a dialogue where everyone is respected, where America is no longer the bully, but a willing partner in creating a new economic order that benefits everyone and not just a few.
I think that's the wisest possible advice and probably the only path that preserves civilization. But the one country standing in the way of that is Israel, which is the only beneficiary of this war, as you just said. I think that's true. Can you think of another beneficiary other than Israel of this war?
Well, Russia benefits, right? Because Russia is trying to win this war in Ukraine.
That's correct.
And America is forced to lift oil sanctions. And so now Russia is now able to take all these war profits, right? And then help the Iranians, finance the Iranians in the struggle against the Americans and Israelis. So the Russians also benefit tremendously from this war.
Yeah, but fair point. Israel has to be constrained by the United States in order to do what you just recommended it do. Is that possible? Does the American president have the authority to control its client state?
So if you look at the domestic situation in Israel, Israel no longer behaves rationally. It is sort of overtaken by eschatological fever, right? So if you look at videos coming out of Israel, there are rabbis going around saying that this war in the Middle East, even though it's destroying Tel Aviv, it's good for us because this will lead to the coming of our Messiah. So they believe that it is when Israel is under the most strain, when the very existence of Israel is threatened, then God will intervene because the Jewish people will come together as a nation again and commit themselves, renew their faith in God. And once God sees the blind, trusting, absolute faith of the Jewish people, then he will save his people by sending his Messiah, who will then redeem the Jewish people. So another way of saying this is secular temporal matters don't really matter. This war in the Middle East, not an issue. What matters is divinity. What matters is our relationship with God.
Yes.
So what matters is faith. If nuclear bombs go flying, doesn't really matter.
What's so interesting is that, 25 years ago at 9/11, whatever you think of how that happened and why, there was, I saw it personally, a political Islam there were Wahhabists, there were a lot of Islamic radicals around the world. And for a bunch of reasons over 25 years, that hasn't disappeared. There still exist Islamic radicals, but it's not, an important political force anymore. At the same time, as Islam in general has become much more moderate, and the GCC is kind of the most obvious example of this, there has been a rise of Jewish Wahhabism and evangelical Christian Wahhabism, so to speak. I mean, you've seen this eschatological extremism among some American Protestants, Christians, and some Israeli and American Jews. How did that happen? What is that?
Right. So first of all, I don't think we can ever overestimate the influence of eschatology in American politics.
Exactly.
So I'll give an example where about a quarter of Americans are evangelicals, and a lot of them are Christian Zionists. So they believe that Israel is crucial, the linchpin to achieving God's plan and the return of Jesus. And so a very prominent figure that you probably know very well is John Hagee, who runs something called the Christians United for Israel. It's 7 million members. And these are the people who are financing a lot of the conflict in the Middle East, in Israel, because they're the ones who are funding West Bank settlements. And so Christian Zionism, it is an extremely powerful political force in America. So your question is, how did this happen? And
yes,
the issue is that this is a plan that has been in motion for centuries, and it's a very complicated history, but it involves different religious groups among the Jews, Septime Frankists, Shabbat Lubavitch, which you've talked about, but also it involves the Freemasons, the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians. It involves the Jesuits. So you have these different secret societies, different religious organizations working together through the centuries to achieve this plan for the end of the world, which heralds the Messianic age. Okay. And there are different components of this plan, but the basic components are: one is the creation of the nation state of Israel, which happened in 1948. And then you need to have the building of the third temple, which requires the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is actually, which could happen during this war, given what we've seen so far. So the Israelis have closed off the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as well as other religious sites like the Church of Holy Sepulchre, to tourists these past few days. There's rumors that for the past 2 years, the Israelis have been conducting these archaeological digs under the Al-Aqsa Mosque to basically destroy the foundations of the mosque, so that they can conduct a controlled demolition of the mosque and blame it on a missile strike from the Iranians. And there's actually talk among the Israelis of using this plan to ignite a war between the Arabs and the Persians. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque needs to be destroyed for the third temple. They also talk about this war of Gog and Magog between Israel and the entire world. Then the coming of the Jewish Messiah, the creation of the Greater Israel Project, the return of all Jews from the diaspora. So there are different components to this plan. If you just observe geopolitical events, we're seeing these events converge together today. I mean, all these events are playing out. So it seems as though there are these very powerful shadow forces working behind the scenes. We don't know who they are, but it seems as though they're able to control geopolitics in a certain manner as to fulfill their eschatological script.
What role do you think Donald Trump plays in this?
That's a really hard question to answer. So let's look at different possibilities. Okay, the first possibility is that he's been employed as an actor and he's just following a script, but he doesn't really know where this movie is going. He's just doing his part, but he's manipulated behind the scenes by people around him. And when reporters asked him, like, why is this war in Iran happening? He did say that his advisors, which include Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, Peter Hegseth, Marco Rubio, told him that the Iranians were so close to getting a nuclear weapon and that the Iranians were going to attack first. And so I was basically misled. And I think that's probably true in that Trump surrounds himself with certain people that have a certain political eschatological agenda. So that's one possibility, that he's just an actor. Another possibility is that he himself has a messianic calling. Okay. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to January 2021, he was politically dead, right? Because the January 6th riots happened. He was impeached twice. And then after he left office, there was lawfare conducted against him, and he went bankrupt. So it was as though the entire world went against him. But now he's president of the United States. And so how would he personally understand this? I think a lot of it is God has asked him to serve. There's a call to serve, and he has to fulfill a mission. What this mission is, okay? What this mission is, whether it's to save Israel, whether it's to save America, whether it's a part of a grander scheme, only he in his heart knows. And I think no one except him knows, okay? So I think that's another possibility. And the third possibility is that this is all Israel's doing. Netanyahu is the one who's forced him into this sort of situation because the Israelis attacked first. And Marco Rubio said this, where, you know what, we wanted these negotiations, but the Israelis were planning to attack. If they attacked, the Iranians would be compelled to attack both the Americans and the Israelis. And we
I haven't Tucker on that to stream this shit. Tucker on top of that shit.
Can the United States and Israel destroy the state of Iran? More than can they just open up the Strait of Hormuz, but can they destroy the state of Iran? That seems to be the objective. If you listen to the Americans and the Israelis, the answer is yes, definitely. If you talk to the Iranians, not surprisingly, they say no. The question is, what is the
Hold on, y'all.
ground truth? What is the most likely evidence on the ground? What do the fundamentals say? Because that has everything to do with how this war will be resolved one way or the other. And let's take a look, first of all, from the United States side. Let's just look, first of all, with what Secretary of War Pete Hegseth this morning said is the American objective.
We're treating Iran like the breathalyzer in my car and blowing it the hell up.
Oh, wait, sorry. That's Colin and Jost, actually, of Saturday Night Live. I always get them confused because, as you're going to see, the real Pete Hegseth looks more like a caricature than he does the Secretary of War. Here's that video.
And again, today will be the largest strike package yet, just like yesterday was. As I've said from day one, our capabilities continue to build, Iran's continue to degrade. We're hunting and striking death and destruction from above.
I mean, seriously, can you tell the difference? If you didn't know and you just said which one is an actor and which one is the actual secretary, I think you'd be hard pressed to answer it, because that the one we have looks more performative than it does an actual leader of the largest military on the face of the earth with the most reach. But that's what we have. But you see there from his comments, this is a continue. That was from this morning, and the secretary is continuing on along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to build the case that we are pounding mercilessly and relentlessly, killing. He keeps on talking about that, using that language that we are destroying. We have complete mastery of the skies, that there's nothing the Iranian side can do, that we keep killing lots of people. He'll separately talk about that the Iranian side is on that the Israeli side is working on complementary objectives, whereas the United States is apparently going after their military capacity, drone capabilities, their manufacturing capabilities, their missile launchers, and the like. The Israeli side is going after the infrastructure and the softer targets, meaning the human targets, to try to simultaneously destroy the state. So this is all about destroying the state of Iran. That seems to be the objective. Whatever anyone's saying out loud, when you look at what they're actually doing, that's what they're trying to accomplish. The question is, can they? Because obviously the central issue right now is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the blockage of a significant portion of the global flow of petroleum into through the strait, through the Gulf of Oman, and out into the rest of the world. And as long as the Iranian side has control over that, then they are succeeding. So we are now in day 20 of this war, and the idea that we're on the ascendancy, as Secretary Hicks has said, we're going up and they're going down. So far, that's not been reflected on the ground. As a matter of fact, what we've seen so far is that the Iranian side that is on the lower end, and when you look at the spreadsheet, they are definitely on the lower end of nearly any category you want to look at, military-wise, capability-wise, and yet they have absorbed all of these blows so far, these body blows, which have been pretty substantial in many categories, and yet they still retain the ability to continue to exist as a state. They still control the territory, and they still control that strait. Now, let's take a look at what the Israeli side has to say and what they're trying to do on the ground. And let's look, first of all, at former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who came onto television yesterday to answer the question when in light of all these assassinations they've been having, is that going to cause the people on the ground to rise up and revolt against them? That was one of the original hopes on the Israeli side. He kind of tries to dampen a little bit on that, but then goes a little bit further in the other direction.
The issue of the rise up, that's a decision the Iranian people will have to make. That's not ours to decide. We are very considerably degrading the regime itself, the Basij, the terror police, the policemen that have been running after women who don't cover their heads, et cetera, but that's not ours to decide. We're focused on removing the threat to the region and the threat to Israel.
And of course, what they define as the threat to Israel is the existence of Iran. And so, of course, they're on this campaign of assassinations. They are trying to, as he said there, they're going after the Basij, which is kind of the militia. That's spread, that's used for internal stability and also for any kind of external aggression. They have, it's kind of like a sort of like your National Guard, roughly discussed here. That's on top of their formal army, and then also the IRGC force. So they have several layers of military, and the Israeli side is going after all of them, as they're also going along with the senior leaders, of course. The intent is to weaken the fabric of what is even a government. Any government that has a chance to try and hold on to its people has to have those arms. I mean, even look at the United States. We've obviously got our active duty military forces. We've got a National Guard. You have police forces. You have like the FBI. You have just your local police forces, your state, et cetera. So you have local, federal, and state security apparatuses to try to maintain control. Israel is methodically trying to go after every one of those. They have released some videos that show even policemen directing traffic are a target. They get blown up. Everybody's a target, checkpoints, et cetera. They're trying to weaken the fabric of what holds a government together. At the same time, they're going after the government itself. Now, that is being supported by the United States. If there is a concurrent military strategy where they're working together to try to have a complementary and a little bit overlapping strategies on the front where the the narrative front, the United States is also working real hard in the public sphere through mainstream media to build a case that, yes, we think that's a great idea. Here is Brian Hook doing exactly that.
I think Israel is doing to Iran what Israel did to Hamas and to Hezbollah. You know, President Assad from Syria is now in Moscow, and so many of the Iranian proxies have fled Iraq and Syria. And I think that that same wartime strategy that they applied to those terrorist organizations, they're now applying it to the Iranian regime. They have had incredible success. They are decapitating the Iranian leadership. They did that to a degree during the 12-day war. And now in this conflict, they're going to have an even longer runway to, I think, address the people who are behind the government that is the world's strongest supporter of terrorism. We could have a post-conflict sort of scenario where the Iranian regime is largely at peace with its neighbors, not by choice, but because they have no other option, because they have been demilitarized.
So you see what I mean? You see, he's laid it out right there. They are literally trying to demilitarize the country of Iran. Now, again, let me just pull something up here. This is Iran, folks. 4 times bigger than the country of Iraq right next to it. You see there, and all of this difficult terrain here. And it's just scattered and filled with cities all over the place. This is not something that tiny Israel, and even with the United States with its combat power, is just going to demilitarize without an army. Look at what Russia has been trying to do to the Ukrainian side. That's one of their expressed goals, is the demilitarization of the Ukraine side. They have a ground force. They have an army, 700 and something thousand strong inside the borders of Ukraine, or what used to be the borders of Ukraine. And they have this extraordinary air campaign that goes back and forth. And yet you see in 4 years, they have not been able to demilitarize them. Now, what makes anybody think that the Israelis and Americans are going to even go further? Because the Russians are talking about the actual army. They're not going after the internal security forces. They're not going after anybody else, anywhere else in the country other than energy infrastructure. But in terms of military personnel, they're not trying to take anybody else out anywhere else. They're not assassinating anybody, etc. They're just trying to demilitarize the military, and that alone is proving extremely difficult. Iran has somewhere around 500,000 active forces. When you look at the IRGC, the regular army, and the Basij, that's if no one gets called up to active duty. Then it could go up over 1 million, but at least 500,000. And if you don't have a ground army, you think you're going to demilitarize them? Yes, you can have videos like the ones I talked about earlier, where you had a policeman blown up directing traffic. You can have some of these drones go in and take out individual leaders here and there. It's a country of 90 million people. Why are you going to set up on going on an objective that is nearly impossible to achieve without a ground force? You just can't kill your way to victory with air power alone. It just won't work, especially in a country like the one I showed you with that topographical map. I mean, especially if you're in that open space like in Tehran or some of the other big cities, it's a lot easier to target stuff, but it's a lot harder when you're talking about getting into the mountains. And obviously people and command centers and military personnel and various other leaders can reposition into the mountains. People do that all the time in wars, have for centuries. That's what's happened. That people did that during World War II, etc. There's many things you can do. They're not just going to sit there and allow themselves to get blown up all of these times. So you're already going after something that is a near impossibility, and yet there we go, setting ourselves up for failure by continuing on. And of course, the Iranian side the Israeli side, forgive me, is saying, yeah, look, let's go with these the word I'm looking for, it just slipped my mind there, is the effort to just assassinate all the leaders. That's what they're trying to get done. They literally are saying there's no limits. We're just going to go after eliminating any Iranian official once they have this targeting circle, and they don't have to have approval. So they've delegated it to a lower level. They're going to continue to try to do that. But the question is that going to work? And I told you we're going to listen to what each side has to say here. Let's see what the Iranian side has to say do you think that this is going to work? Are you really afraid that all of this firepower from the Israeli side and the American side, which is substantial, is not minor, nothing to brush off here, but what do the Iranians say? Here's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi on that exact topic.
I do not know why the Americans and the Israelis still have not understood this point. The Islamic Republic of Iran has a strong political structure with established political, economic, and social institutions. The presence or absence of a single individual does not affect this structure. Of course, individuals are influential and each person plays their role, some better, some worse, some less. But what matters is that the political system in Iran is a very solid structure. We have not had anyone more important than the leader himself, and even the leader was martyred. Yet the system continued to work and immediately provided a replacement. If anyone else is martyred, it will be the same. If the foreign minister were ever to be martyred, there would ultimately be someone else to take the position.
And that's exactly what we've seen so far. After that video was made, it was dated on the 17th. Then there was another major assassination, Ali Larijani. I think he was a former foreign minister, was a former IRGC commander, and was widely regarded as one of the intellectual leaders of his country. Well, he was killed, and just like Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said there, he was then replaced. And now then that's just hours ago, Iran has named the former defense minister as Larijani's replacement. So you got one experienced guy and you got another one to replace. And let me just kind of point out something that we don't know yet. The assumption is that each time you take out one of these people, and Larijani was one of them that falls in this category, they say you take out somebody who was experienced, who was really good, and then now you're going to have somebody less good in his place. In fact, that's what they said about Qasem Soleimani, the general that President Trump ordered assassinated in 2020. And they said that the guy that replaced him, because he was like a stalwart and nobody could replace him. So they said they suffered from that. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But someone did replace him, and they continued to perform that duty over all that time. Now then, here is Larijani. He's going. The assumption, though, is that whoever replaces him will not be as good. But what there also may be is that some of these guys, like the Ayatollah himself that was assassinated, the guy that replaces him right now, it's his son, may not, whether he's as capable or not is a secondary issue. But what if he is not as moderate as the one that replaced him? What if you get somebody who's more dynamic, who's more angry, who more wants revenge, who is less conservative on what he does and is more risk-taking and is more willing to use violence and to take actions that are more risky, that could potentially kill more of our side? See, we don't think about those kind of things because, well, we don't want them to be true, so we just pretend that they're not. Now, I don't know anything about this guy. His name just came out just before I came on the air when I found it. So I haven't been able to track down any kind of a bio on him, but he does have some experience. And the concern is that, especially if you start knocking off so many of these people, that's going to generate anger. And even if they weren't more on the radical side before, you're radicalizing them. Because the idea is that, well, we'll just kill them and everybody's going to slump their shoulders and they're going to realize they can't win and then they're going to end up collapsing. They're going to see policemen dying everywhere and the IRGC and the leaders, and everyone's just going to lay down their arms and quit. I mean, I think that's what's intended. I mean, otherwise, I'm not sure what we're trying to do. But look, the Israelis don't actually believe that. This piece here in the Washington Post a couple of days back says Israel urges Iranians to revolt, but privately assess that they'll be slaughtered. Senior Israeli officials have told the U.S. diplomats that Iranian protesters will get slaughtered if they took to the streets, as that President Trump was asking, as Lindsey Graham was asking, as so many others, Jack Keane, et cetera. If they take to the street as the government, even as Israel publicly calls for them to do so. But the cable circulated by a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem on Friday relayed an Israeli assessment that Iran's regime is, quote, not cracking and is willing to fight to the end. Okay, so you can see that the Israelis know. Well, then if they know that, if that's actually a cable, if that's being reported accurately, then you've got to ask, what are you doing? If you realize that the chance that the people are going to rise up, and maybe Naftali Bennett in that clip there kind of revealed that a little bit, exposed it, He said, well, that's not really for us to decide. Yeah, because you can't do it. You wanted to, but you realize it's not going to work. And now then, whenever that cable was written, now then we have even more time to prove it's not happening. In fact, they're solidifying around what's left of the regime. So it's even less likely now because you have the rally around the flag thing, just like happens nearly all the time, as it was entirely predictable. Well, if that's the case, then where are you going to go next? Because as I said, when you have a country the vast size of Iran as it is, you don't have the ammunition to even have a chance to peel away and kill all these guys from the air. All you can do is effectively terror techniques to scare everybody or to make everybody afraid and always looking up, wondering if there's going to be a bomb buzzing in over their head or a missile or a drone or something like that. And that will happen to a degree, but that is going to steal the resolve of people, folks. I mean, we have this throughout history, and it's now playing out exactly as we're talking here. Well, one of the other things that we have to pay attention to that the Iranians are, and that is history. And I think that hardly anybody pays any attention in the West to this, maybe not even in Israel. I can't for the life of me figure out why. But when you're trying to say, is this course of action going to work here? You got to say, have there been any similar cases where this has happened, where this strategy has been attempted, that maybe we're trying to knock them out and to assassinate a lot of people and to cause some collapse or something where our side worked out? Has that happened? Or has it been attempted and did it fail? And especially against the same target?
Perhaps Israelis and Americans, they should have already studied the history when Iran resisted 8 years. Saddam invaded Iran. The US, Europe, Soviet Union, China, India, all regional countries, they were supporting the aggression of Saddam, and Iran was alone. And for 8 years, Iran alone resisted. Saddam is over 20 years, Saddam is gone. Therefore, I think they will be able to continue their resilience, their resistance, at least for months to come. And about the assassination strategy with Israelis now they are leading, if you go back again to history, after Revolution 1979, up to the US-Israeli attack on Iran in 2025, thousands of Iranian officials have been assassinated, thousands. And during 8 years war, after war, under different circumstances, but we have never seen regime collapse.
So it's been tried with Iran before. 8 years it was tried. Hundreds of people were assassinated. Hundreds of thousands were killed. The place was bombed mercilessly, and yet they never broke. Why do we think that same people with that same history, that same mentality, that same DNA is suddenly going to submit now? I mean, do we think, well, because it's American bombs this time, or at least it's being fired by Americans? I guess a lot of it was in the past, especially from Iraq. But our bombs are better. And I don't know, this arrogance that says, I know it didn't work before, but we're going to make it work now because we're Americans. So we want it to work now. So it doesn't matter that the fundamentals don't call for it. It doesn't matter that there's no path to a victory that you can identify. We're going to do it anyway. And that applies both to Israel and the United States. You have embarked on something that militarily has almost no chance of success, only by the sheerest, wildest luck that would go against all the fundamentals could see it succeed. And instead of doing what makes sense, what's logical, what's rational, you're literally throwing the dice and rolling everything, gambling it all on one hit down here, and you have no control over whether it works or not. You just have to hope that it does. And if it doesn't, then we are in a world of hurt. And that's kind of where we are right now. They have a historical experience that they could go years. And of course, they've been oppressed by the United States and Israel on many fronts, economically and otherwise. And assassinations have been happening for decades. So this has been going on a long time. So their willingness to suffer is likely pretty high. We're at day 20 right now. And the question is, where are we going to go from here? Now, the key issue for us right now, this is not like the Strait of Hormuz. I'm sorry, the Red Sea issue with the Houthis, where the U.S. can just get tired of trying and spend a lot of money and say, all right, forget about that. You know what? Let's just declare victory and go home. They begged us to surrender or whatever. We're done, moving on. You can't do that now because the strait is closed. They have military control of that strait. They can decide who does and who doesn't get to go through, and people try to go through without their permission. You see burning hulks in the middle of the Persian Gulf. It's just a horrific situation, which is a message that nobody will cross it. Unless they get permission, they're not going to cross that thing. So then the question is, what are we going to do now? Well, on Laura Ingraham last night, Stephen Miller was on there as a guest, and she asked a hard question. She said, hey, this whole thing about the strait, I mean, we're trying to get people coming in from Europe and NATO allies, et cetera. Nobody's coming in with their Navy, but it's been, 3 weeks now. The thing's not open. What gives?
Why has this taken so long?
Well, I would look at it the exact opposite, which is how has this happened so fast? So you're talking about what would normally be considered months or even years to achieve these military objectives, instead have been achieved in a matter of days, because under the leadership of President Trump, and then, of course, with Secretary Hagsis in the Department of War, we are not fighting a politically correct battle. The hands of our warriors are not tied in getting up and going after the objective, and going after the objective ruthlessly, because this is war. And in a war, you have to fight totally. And so we've seen the leadership of this regime has been completely decapitated and obliterated.
Okay, there's almost no truth to anything he said there. All he is trying to raise his voice and sound tough, because there's almost nothing accurate about what he said. He said, our hands are no longer tied. She asked, why has this not opened up after 3 weeks? And he says, I would say, why have we done it so fast? We've achieved so much. You've achieved nothing. You have killed a lot of people and bombed a lot of targets, and you've serviced a lot of things and killed a lot of people. That has accomplished nothing. Nothing in Iran has changed. The Ayatollah and his government, or the Mullah government, some call it, the Islamic Republic of Iran, still exists. It is still in power. The system is unchanged. So you haven't done anything there. You've assassinated a lot of people. The straits are still not open. They still have the ability to launch missiles. They still have 400 and something kilograms of fissile material. You haven't stopped any of that. They have boats underwater. They have submarines. They have drone boats that they can send out. They have hundreds of high-speed boats, which have hardly even been seen yet, much less destroyed. So they're all still in their bunkers, and they can be brought out at any time. So you haven't done any of that. You can't even find most of their bunkers. Ergo, you are not winning. You are not succeeding, Mr. Miller, whatever you may say, however tough you may be talking. Well, so now then you have the issue of, well, snap, if that's not working, maybe we should think about some boots on the ground. Now, again, you're looking back at that topographical map I showed you a minute ago, and it doesn't take much to figure out that unless you want to roll out 750,000 or more, 1 million troops or something from a coalition of a bunch of countries, because we don't even have that many, that would be an enormous undertaking. It would take like a half a year at the absolute fastest to get all those troops there with the equipment and training and everything else. And it may not, even then, that may not be enough time. And then the cost would be astronomical, and the strait would be closed the whole time. And so who would be able to sustain that economically? We would probably be in a recession, if not a depression by that time. So that's not really an option. But yet we have evidence here that the United States actually has sent out some more troops, thousands more. U.S. way sending thousands of troops to the region as Iran war rages. According to this report here, there's the Tripoli that's en route right now. There's an additional report that up to 5,000 additional troops, which have not been entirely identified, are also on the way. Now, I had a press conference this afternoon with the Japanese Prime Minister. President Trump was asked that question, and he said, I'm not sending troops anywhere right now. But there are some troops that are heading in that direction right now on top of what's there. Now, there's a lot of concern that somebody may be thinking, well, we'll do something on the cheap here. Maybe we'll just try to seize Karg Island. There's too many people keep talking about Karg Island. That's up in the northern part of the Persian Gulf. That you seize that, and that'll give you leverage to open. That's a fantasy. There's no way that's going to work, because you may be able to seize it at very high cost. Now, holding it would be another matter, but it is in the realm of theoretical possibility. You could take it, but that's not going to get you anything. You understand that during the Iran-Iraq War, that island was under constant bombardment. Then lots of people tried to take it, and lots of violence happened on that island. So they're used to that too. Even if you took it, even if you successfully held it, there are alternatives for Iran. It would hurt them because alternatives, they can't get out the volume of oil they can get through there. So it'll definitely cause some economic pain for them, be very significant pain, but not fatal pain. They would still be able to operate. They have other alternatives. So even that wouldn't get it done. Well, then what are you doing with those troops there? Why are we sending those few troops in? It looks to me like we're grasping at straws because the Israeli part's not working. The American, the air power alone is not working. And Stephen Miller's protestations aside, nothing has been accomplished yet. And interesting things, and I worry about this because with President Trump's trying to figure out, well, what can I do next? Because he may try to do that. We're going to see some grounds. And when you look at the polling numbers, there's some troubling numbers up in here. First of all, I'm afraid that Trump may just be looking at that second line there where it says Republicans 14%. That's an alarming number by itself. It said, yes, I support a large scale invasion. That's unfortunately people who literally have no idea what they're talking about. They don't even know what that means. If I said topographical map, they wouldn't even know what one was, I suspect. They just hear President Trump talking. They watch movies. They see Iwo Jima in the past and all this, and they just think, yeah, Desert Storm, we've done this before. Sure, why not? Let's do another one. Just, teach them Iranians once and for all. That's people who are motivated by emotion, not by actual evidence and sound analysis. But still, even 63% say yes, but only special forces of the Republicans. Now, you see that overall, of course, the Democrats are reversed in all these. This is always the case when the party that's not in power, they're not going to support the president doing anything. But you see that other one there, independence, which is the one that's so crucial for anybody thinking that they're going to have a good chance to win the midterm elections coming up. It's an uncomfortable high to me anyway. 30% of them are okay with some special forces, but you see 58%, fully 58% of the independents are not in support of sending any troops for any reason into the Iran. And obviously 87% of Democrats are likely the same thing. So you see a good percentage of the overall population, which is why when you look at all adults together, 55% are against. So a majority of the country is against that, and a relatively small percentage totally is for it. But President Trump may say, yeah, but those are my people, so maybe I can get that done. Well, in terms of that special operations force, let me show you something that's similar. Now, we've shown you many times that map of the Strait of Hormuz, and some think, well, look, we just got to get that strait open, that one part. And in fact, no, let me go ahead and show you this because it is relevant to this conversation right here. If you pull up and you take a look at what would be required for this, let me show you the straits here.
Contact Roberts Air for all your heating and cooling needs.
You say, okay, all right, if you get the straits open, then we can have the shipping come through, because it's like this is such a narrow bend here, and the channel where ships can actually go through is actually even more narrow than that. I've heard is slow as 2 miles apart, which is really small, because this is, I think, like 30 miles from side to side, but that's not really the issue because you can't sail along the coast very well or too close to these rocks. So you really have the channel. It's very, very narrow here. So you don't even have to have much of it in mind. But let's just say, yeah, let's send in some special forces. Let's take these little islands here, and that'll give us control over these areas here. And we'll bring in some more military forces down here. This is Dubai down in here. So these are friendly folks. And I'm sure that they would say, yeah, you can bring your forces up here to keep it open. And maybe you had troops on this side and this side, and you say, you know what, we'll keep it open that way. Well, what is that going to do for you folks when you don't have any control over any of this? And just take a look at how this is. I mean, this is from the northern point on. I mean, you're talking that it's several hundred miles. I mean, there's 428 just in that one territory right there. And let's say you control this part. Well, that's well and good for you. But then what is that going to do? Now, then on the other side of that, you have another problem. So if you take this area here and you can control this, well, then let's just say from right here, and then how much further to the Iranian border, to where they have the ability to strike, and you're looking, there's another 260 miles. So there's 500 miles that you wouldn't even control if you're able to take this strait right here. And by the way, this is not something that hasn't been done before. There has been a similar situation in history where this has happened. Let's take a look at that. And that is in the Battle of Gallipoli in the Dardanelles Straits. This right here is a picture that shows, this area here, you can't quite see it under the words there. This is about that's the map there is about 10 miles wide. So when you look at that little specter there, you're talking 30, 40 miles. That's it, 30, 40 miles in that whole area right there. That's how small it is. You see that the strait itself is much bigger. But when the British said, hey, you know what, we want to take this area here and get through the straits of the Dardanelles Straits to get through to the other side and to control it, was absolutely disastrous. Says the Allied invasion of Gallipoli Peninsula during the First World War was one of the Allies' greatest blunders of the war, one that cost the lives of 48,000 Allied soldiers while failing to achieve any of the operational objectives of the campaign. Reason for the failure are numerous, including improper preparation of the invading force, incomplete intelligence, and an underestimation of the enemy's will to fight. And all those are absolutely crucial because we have to understand this is clearly not anything that was planned. This hasn't been resourced. The fact that President Trump only now is starting to send troops in, only now is sending the Tripoli, the USS Tripoli in there with the Marine landing force. So that means that it's not wired tight, that we don't even have that many troops, because I'm not sure how many were deployed in the battle for Gallipoli. But if they lost 48,000 over several years trying to get this thing cleared out, and look, the terrain is very similar in the mountains that were over the straits here. They were very similar to what was happening here. And the same way that the Turks defended those, the Iranians can defend these. And it said with concerted defense, that was actually a Department of Defense, an air war college study that was done. They concluded that firm leadership on the defenders, because they were experienced. The Turks knew the terrain, the British didn't, and they were trying to force it with ships. It didn't work. Then they brought in small numbers of ground troops, relatively speaking, to try and clear it out, and that was absolutely disastrous. And it completely failed. They never succeeded. Even throughout World War I, the British never succeeded on that. And we don't want to try and repeat that. And some of the main supplies, or some of the main fundamentals that went into that failure, are screaming right now, don't do this. Because you haven't had a chance. For something of this nature, folks, you would need months to get the force together, to get it trained up, make sure you have all the right people, you have all the right equipment, and then you would do some training, months of training in terrain very similar. You would do it under force-on-force kinds of things. You would rehearse it. You would make sure it's resourced, etc., and then you would bring it in. Now, ideally, you would like it to be something that was a surprise to the enemy side, either in the location or the timing or some combination of the both. None of those things are here, because it's Kharg Island or it's the Horseshoe of the Bend of the Straits. There's really nowhere else it would be. It would be pointless to get anything anywhere else. If you got something on either one of those sections, either north or south of the strait there, that wouldn't get you anywhere. If you succeeded, what does that do for you? It does absolutely nothing. It doesn't clear the strait. It doesn't clear the channel. It doesn't clear anything. So you've just spent a lot of effort and money. So they're not going to do that. As I'm pointing out, though, even if you succeeded in that horseshoe, it still isn't going to help you. You're still not going to accomplish anything, because that leaves the whole coast on the left and the right side of that in Iranian hands. As I've also shown you, the range of the Iranian short, medium, and long-range missiles are all in range of that. So no matter where they are in the country, they could be hundreds of miles on the far side, and they're still in range of the strait. So even if you had a literal invasion and pushed everybody back, that's, unless you take over the totality of the country, you still can't get the strait open. Do you see the military problem we've gotten ourselves into here? The country is too vast to assassinate all the leaders. The country is too vast to demilitarize and bring them to their heels. And the strait itself is far too vast for the entirety of our armed forces on the ground to go in and clear out. It's a task that's militarily unattainable. That's what we need to understand here. And I don't, for the life of me, understand why our senior generals are not screaming this to the Secretary of Defense, to the President of the United States, or anybody else who will listen. And I don't know, maybe some are behind the scenes, but then I would expect somebody needs to resign before they try to do this. And the fact that the Tripoli's going down there, the fact that more troops have been deployed there, and you're going to apparently try to do something is insane. Because it's militarily unachievable. And if you send troops in to try to do something like that, even if they have the tactical success of getting a foothold, it won't accomplish anything and will come at the cost of blood and eventually fail and have to be withdrawn, probably under fire, and it will hand a massive victory to the Iranian side. Don't do that. I'm begging and pleading the White House not to do something that has almost no chance of success at all. We need to be looking for any kind of diplomatic off-ramp that we can get. I don't know if there isn't a good one at this point. Once we plunged into this war, we've eliminated the chance to have a good outcome. That just doesn't exist anymore, folks. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. But now what we have to do is make sure that we don't even more complicate the problem. Just imagine this. As bad as it is right now, I think oil's still hovering under $100, somewhere in the 90s. If it keeps going on, it's going to go up by the end of the month. It could be up well over 100. And with no prospect to open it, the longer it goes, the more weeks that turn into months, that turn into many months, that number is just going to continue to go higher, and the global economy is going to start to really suffer. But you don't have the military wherewithal to force the thing open to your side. And if you try, then you're in an even worse condition than you are now, because now that you've played your military card and they have been defeated, the Iranian side is bolstered because they will have succeeded. The strait will still be closed. The price of oil will still be high, and then the diplomatic price will be even higher. So as ugly as it would be to do something right now, if we ignore that, continue going forward, we will almost certainly suffer much higher casualties and then have an even higher diplomatic price to pay to get that strait open. And if the Iranian side remains firm and stalwart in what they're doing and is willing to pay near-term pain of more destruction on the surface and more death and destruction, probably some more assassinations. I bet we're not done with that yet either. They can drag this out until the pain on the American side is so high that they finally have a chance from their perspective to find some sort of negotiated end that will result in giving them some kind of success. Or, of course, to me, the worst case scenario is that as the time continues to go on and Trump's trying to figure some stuff out, we are alerted one day that Iran has a nuclear weapon and they test it somewhere. I mean, to me, that there's about a 25% chance that some have suggested, Ambassador Freeman has suggested he thinks it's going to happen. I think John Mearsheimer is convinced it's going to happen. I don't have enough knowledge to know. Maybe they're right, but I think that it would be illogical for Iran not to do it. The question is, can they? Ted Postal believes that they can. We'll see. But I think that there's at least a 25% chance that one day, just out of nowhere, there's either a nuclear test detonation, maybe underground, maybe not, maybe even on the surface to really get the people to pay attention. And they're going to announce that they're now a nuclear weapon state. If this goes months, I think the chances rise for that. But all the more reason why we should not find out. We should not get to that point. We should go back to finding a negotiated settlement under the ugliest terms, the best ugly terms we can get right now before they get even worse. That's where we are, folks. You need to understand the cold, hard reality, military and diplomatic facts. That's where we are. So don't listen to all this nonsense that you're hearing in a lot of mainstream media and a lot of these claims coming out of the administration about how good things are going, or from the Secretary of War. They're not. We're blowing up a lot of stuff, but that is not equal strategic outcomes. That's where we are. Thanks, folks. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Daniel Davis Deep.
here, and it particularly has its eye on China, not just trying to fight a direct war against China, but trying to impact the resources that China relies on from other parts of the multipolar world, other key pillars out there, such as Iran. So what should we be keeping an eye on when it comes to this conflict and what it means for overall U.S. foreign policy? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Brian Berletic, a geopolitical analyst, former U.S. Marine, and host of the New Atlas. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on the show. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here, as I know that we are almost 3 weeks into this war of aggression waged by the US and Israel against Iran. And Iran is not backing down here. Not only has their government not fallen apart, but they have now launched over 60 waves of retaliatory attacks. Their latest targets include Israel's largest oil refinery in Haifa, along with energy infrastructure across the Gulf region, after Israel attacked the South Pars gas field, the largest oil and natural gas field in the world, which is jointly operated by Iran and Qatar, and an attack that Trump claimed that the U.S. knew nothing about in advance. How do you view the current state of this war? And is there anything about Iran's retaliation that has surprised you?
No. And we've had this conversation many times. Every single time I come on, I bring up the policy papers. If you want to know what the United States is going to do or what the United States knows about a nation that it is targeting, read the policy papers. All the way back in 2009, there's a Rand Corporation paper about Iran, its capabilities, the possibility of it obtaining nuclear weapons. They were thinking about it theoretically, what if? And they came to the conclusion that Iran has, back then, 2009, tremendous asymmetrical military capabilities, not just to defend Iran itself, but it had a network across the region to deal with. And they admitted that it's an encroaching U.S. presence in the region. They admitted this in the policy paper, that the U.S. is encroaching upon Iran, and Iran is doing this in response. It is not carrying out regional aggression. It doesn't seek regional hegemony. It is simply doing this in response to the U.S.'s attempt to control the region. And they talked about mosaic defense, which is something that I brought up again since this started. Iran has a highly decentralized command and control system where even if you took out central command in Tehran or wherever it is actually located, and communication is cut or is just completely gone, they have divided their military command into provincial commands, separate subordinate commands that can act independently, not just in terms of decision making, but in terms of logistics and intelligence, ammunition, the actual facilities launching these missiles and drones, probably even manufacturing them. And so you're not just fighting Iran, you're fighting all of these commands that have been spread out across all of Iran. And so they knew this all the way back in 2009. They warned that it would just become better, more capable over the years. So from 2009 to 2025, 2026, when this war actually openly started, it's been one of these hybrid wars for decades against Iran, actually, but now it's a direct war with Iran. We can see the results, the consequences of this. So there's absolutely no way this policy paper was written back then by people funded by the U.S. government, connected to the Pentagon. They had to have known this. They knew this going in. And this is exactly what they did. They lied to the American people that this was going to be a quick in and out. They knew it wasn't going to be. They had resources there in the region for like maybe a 2, 3, maybe 4-week operation. But almost immediately after it started, they started bringing additional resources to keep it going for another month or two at least. And they just led the American people by the nose into what they said was going to be a quick operation. They knew all along was going to be a long, very costly operation. I just saw Secretary Hegseth talking about we need, what is it, 200 billion extra dollars just for this. So that's what's happening. They're not surprised. They're pretending to be surprised because, as we'll probably get into a little bit later, this isn't just about Iran in the Middle East. This is about Russia and China, and one of their priorities is almost certainly cutting off energy flow from the entire Middle East, not just from Iran, but from the entire region going to China in a last-ditch effort to try to strangle and at least slow down China's rise.
Yeah, and I know that that's something that you've been warning about for, gosh, years now, right? The fact that the US, it's not just about the war of the moment. It's not like Trump wakes up and he goes, oh, I'm going to target Venezuela or target Cuba or Iran. It is this overall US war on the entire multipolar world, and it's going after these key pillars. And it's interesting because you brought up something there. You know, Trump initially, yes, he came out and it was this 4-day operation, right? That's how it was communicated to the public. So when it comes to the military readiness level, it looks as though, right, when the US is in this position where, kind of how you were saying, they're now grabbing all of these different military assets, trying to send everything to the region, even to a certain extent, taking their eye off of Russia and China, at least directly. Do you see it that way? Or is this all part of this grand strategy where they think, oh, Europe's got Russia, right? Our allies in the Pacific, they've got China, so we get to focus here on Iran for a little bit, with the plan to eventually, of course, go back to China.
I'm sure that I said this before the 2024 election on your show. I said that, people were pinning all their hopes on President Trump, his second administration, that he was going to end all of these wars and turn everything around. And I warned that, no, he's not going to do that. And even before the election, before they openly just completely did the opposite, you heard comments from people like soon-to-be Vice President J.D. Vance saying, we shouldn't be spending wasting weapons on fighting Russia. And people heard that, and then they closed their ears and they didn't hear the rest of the sentence, because the rest of the sentence was, we should be using those weapons to go fight China. And a prerequisite for fighting China is taking out their supply of energy in the Middle East, including from Iran, but also from the wider region. And then people might remember me warning that they were going to dump their proxy war that they started against Russia in Ukraine. They were going to dump it on Europe. They said it before the election. And then Secretary Hegseth made a big announcement that I've repeated a million times since he made it in February 2025. He was saying, we're going to do division of labor. Europe's going to take on Russia. They're going to just try to at least hold it there for us. And we need to go work on China and Iran. I mean, everyone knew that Iran was somewhere in there. Venezuela was always an ongoing project for the U.S. to topple Venezuela, politically capture Venezuela, but they did that also. And again, what are the common denominators between Venezuela, Iran, and Russia? The majority of all of their energy exports goes to China. They're also, well, maybe not Venezuela so much, but pillars of the multipolar world. I guess Venezuela in Latin America is one of the main pillars, Venezuela and Cuba. And this is why they're targets. And there's different reasons why the U.S. is targeting all of these countries as part of their strategy. Venezuela, obviously, because it was sending energy to China. Cuba, I think, is more symbolic. It's not a threat to the United States in any shape, form, or way. It's not a massive energy exporter. They've put a blockade on Cuba, and now it's energy deficient, and again, to the detriment of the civilian population there. That's to make an example, because there's a large and growing list of countries lining up behind multipolarism, and the U.S. is saying, do you see what we just did to Venezuela and Cuba? That can be you next. You're not Iran, you're not Russia or China. You're more like Cuba and Venezuela, and we will knock you over if you don't get back in line. This is the message that they're sending. President Trump almost openly says he's at war with BRICS and with multipolarism. I mean, they're openly saying it. And I remember people talking about Marco Rubio, talking about it's a multipolar world. Just because he's acknowledging that it exists doesn't mean he accepts it or wants to be a part of it. He's saying the multipolarism exists and we need to squash it as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Now, you were talking about the readiness of the U.S. military has been in constant decline. The military industrial base in constant decline. They've desperately tried to ramp it up, and they cannot. There's just systemic issues in the U.S. as a system that cannot do this. And so they're working with what they have. They don't have the ability to fight Russia, Iran, Venezuela, China, all at the same time. So this is why they were talking about strategic sequencing. We will do each one in order. We will use our proxies to do what we cannot do. We will use them to the point of their collapse if necessary. And you can see that happening to Europe first. Now you can see all of the Arab states, even Israel's, being buried in ballistic missiles every single day now since this started. You just talked about the oil fields in Israel. So I mean, this is what the U.S. is doing, and this is how they're doing it. And they made this intent clear for years ahead of time. And President Trump, in the lead up and now since the election, made it abundantly clear, but only if people listened carefully.
Yeah. And I also think, when it comes to their messaging, another part of that is Trump's rhetoric and his ability to go back and forth, right? We've seen this with with the Strait of Hormuz, for example, right? 1 minute it's, we've got this taken care of, we're going to get it open. The next minute it's, we need help. The next minute, why aren't people helping? Then we've got it again. Then we're going to leave it. And it's just like that. I feel like it's almost like this ping pong ball that just keeps going back and forth. How does that then play a role in maybe keeping the public on board, maybe giving them a shred of hope when it comes to, Trump is still going to back out of this? And how much control do you think that Donald Trump actually has here when it comes to the overall U.S. establishment and the fact that this war has been years, decades really in the making?
Absolutely. So this whole business with the Strait of Hormuz, if the U.S. is attacking Iran specifically to cut off energy flowing, not just from Iran, but from the whole region to China, they want the Strait of Hormuz compromised. They want it to be. And Iran is talking about opening the strait just for ships going to a certain list of countries, including China. And the U.S. is mobilizing naval and marine forces specifically tailored for interdicting shipping, and they are bringing it into the region. And I'm almost certain that will play a role in interdicting those ships that Iran is letting through. They have no real interest in opening it. As the U.S. itself has said, as the Trump administration, everyone in the administration has taken turns saying, we're energy independent, so we don't care. And what they're saying is we're holding the whole world hostage with the war we started. And now you can hear with the testimony of what is her official position, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of Intelligence, how this is another WMD ridiculous pretext to attack Iran. It was a complete, well-known, deliberate lie that they sold to the public. So they did it again, and they did it on purpose. They knew the Strait of Hormuz would be compromised, and if Iran didn't, they would have done it. What's weird is that Iran is taking credit for certain strikes that it's carrying out, including on energy infrastructure, in retaliation for what is being done to them. But there are other strikes that they said they didn't do. And the U.S. they again openly said, we have copies of the Shahed drone. And it's the Shahed drones that are hitting these facilities that Iran said they're not actually hitting. So it's a very bizarre way to do all of this. They're almost openly saying what they're doing. And then, as you pointed out, President Trump is flip-flopping every single day. He says everything so that everyone in American society can just pick what they want to hear and cling on to as this whole ship sinks.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch it play out. And yet I know there are people that they still have hope, right? They still think that, Trump is going to turn it around. And when it comes to turning it around, going back to a point that you made earlier that's really interesting here, the US has this grand plan, but as you were saying, they also have a finite amount of resources. And when it comes to the damage that Iran has been able to inflict just over the last few weeks, we're talking about billions of dollars in radar systems, refueling tankers, MQ-9 Reaper drones, and recently even an F-35 stealth fighter jet. And China's in this position where they have something that the US really needs, refined rare earth minerals. And they're able to be in the driver's seat and say, you're going to use this for the US military. Yeah, no, we're not going to give you that. So the US is over here. All of this damage that they have sustained, it's going to take years and years to repair all of this. Is there an off-ramp here for the US when it comes to the war with Iran? Is there a point where they say, okay, we have taken in too much damage, we're out of interceptor missiles, we can't keep doing this? Or is the blind hope that they are going to somehow magically ramp up the military industrial complex to the point where they can fight this war and then conveniently go, oh, we have all of this in production, now let's turn to China.
I just don't see how that's going to happen. Even if America had all the rare earth minerals it needed, they're still incapable of expanding military industrial production for all of the reasons that myself and many others have pointed out. It's not just about inputs. You also need supply chains. You need a skilled workforce that in the US has been shrinking constantly. And they have, because they are their own worst enemy. The kind of mindset that creates and pursues empires, also the same sort of mindset that is incapable of investing what is necessary to sustain it. They're so greedy. Look at the education system in the United States. They're trying to squeeze every single penny out of students to get the skills they need to sustain the military industrial base and just the industrial base and economy in general. And so they're strangling themselves in a way with their own greed. And these are things you cannot fix by just building bigger factories. You could build a bigger factory. Who's going to run it? Who's going to be in there? And so this is the problem that they have. And we've watched them try to expand production in reaction to their proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. They need to do this, but they cannot do this. They're watching Russia expand its military industrial base drastically. It was already bigger, and now it's even bigger still since 2022. They're looking at China, a colossal industrial base of all kinds, including military, shipbuilding, something like 200 ships to every one ship the US builds. Like that tells you something there. And so this empire in and of itself is an irrational pursuit. And so they have an irrational view on what they can do to cling to it. And this is the problem. I don't think they believe that they can ramp up military industrial production to even match Russia, let alone China. I think what they're trying to do, and they were looking at I was talking about the distant blockade in the Asia Pacific region. I think they looked at that and they said, if China tries to contest that, we don't have the munitions. Look at this conflict with Iran. They can't even topple Iran quickly. Like, even if it happens now, it was still too long and too costly for them. They burned through years and years worth of munition production just in the first week or two alone. So they're trying to solve two problems with one war. They're trying to degrade, possibly topple Iran, plus they're trying to impose the distant blockade on China so far away from China's military capabilities cannot really do anything about it. People constantly say, why doesn't China send its military to go help Iran? It doesn't work that way. You have material realities that prevent that from happening. China built its military to defend China. They don't have the ability to project power because they're not an empire. They don't seek to be an empire. And so there's no reason to have a massive airlift or sea lift component to move your army to the other side of the planet, and then also have the bases ready for them to go in and operate out of. And then again, all the infrastructure required to sustain that. People don't think about those extra things, but that's what makes it possible. Those are capabilities the US built up over decades that China is not even interested in building in the first place. So all of these factors add up. To get us to where we are right now.
And it's so interesting too, because the US, like you said, they spent decades building all of these military bases all around Iran. And now they're in a position where, yeah, you got your bases, but you don't have the interceptor missiles. You don't have the overall munitions that you need. And now you have all of these little allies in the region that are looking around going, hey, when are you sending more ammunition? And the US is saying, hey, we don't have it. Now, I do want to get into, while I have you here, the debate that's been going on, because I know that you have people in the Trump administration, right? You have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who came out and specifically said, yes, there was an imminent threat. It wasn't Iran that was going to attack us. It was Israel that was going to attack Iran. And then you have Joe Kent, the former now director of the U.S. Counterterrorism Center, coming out and saying, again, Iran was not an imminent threat. Israel got us into this war. And I know that you for a long time have been on the opposite end of that debate, right? Saying that the U.S. is the driving factor here, that Israel is very much a vassal state. And it's always interesting to me how people go back and forth, but in a lot of ways, they almost kind of want Israel to be the bad guy, right? They want Israel to be the one that is dragging the US in because maybe that makes the US less of a bad guy. But how do you see this debate as it pertains to the war in Iran that we are now in?
Yes, this is blatant scapegoating, and a lot, not all, but a lot of the people claiming that Israel somehow forced the United States. Just think about it. Israel has a population overall of 10 million, but of actual people that identify as Jews, around 7 million. So you're talking about a population like the size of New York City, maybe smaller, and somehow they control the United States, 300 million people, the largest, most powerful economy. I mean, we could argue about that vis-a-vis China, but up until recently, the most massive, most powerful military on earth, still an extremely dangerous military to this day. And Israel itself, that is 100% dependent on the United States in every conceivable way. Every single jet they fly is an American jet. It's built by the United States and sold to them. Every drop of fuel, every munition that they use, all of the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, this is all coming from the United States. The mid-air refueling that these Israeli jets are dependent on to strike the oil fields, President Trump said he had no idea were going to be struck. The U.S. is sustaining the Israeli air campaign because it's a U.S.-led, U.S.-Israeli air campaign. And so all of the capabilities necessary to carry it out are being done by the United States, enabling Israel to participate. It's just like when the U.S. went to war with Libya in 2011, a lot of the capabilities they built up in Europe was also sustaining the European proxies that took part in that operation. It's exactly the same with Ukraine. It would be like saying President Zelensky is forcing us to waste billions and billions to go fight Russia. We didn't want to fight Russia. Somehow President Zelensky was in Congress and people gave him a certain number of standing ovations. This means President Zelensky controls America. It's utterly absurd. It's ignoring the material realities of how the world actually functions. And if you look at the root of the problem, and we were just talking about Venezuela, Cuba, Ukraine versus Russia, the United States has a massive presence in the Asia-Pacific region. If you look at the globe, the U.S. is everywhere, trying to take over everything. And they're saying the Middle East, that is this essential region of production of energy that much of the world depends on. For some reason, the U.S. wasn't interested in controlling that, save for Israel forcing them to do it. It's just utterly absurd. And so what they're doing is trying to, again, a lot of these people trying to blame Israel now. And this is not to say Israel isn't guilty. They are 100% guilty. They are an extension of the U.S. They are as guilty as the U.S. for all of the crimes that they commit that the U.S. enables. It's just like the government and military in Ukraine are just as guilty. They are aiding and abetting this objective. Israel, in particular, is carrying out genocide against the Palestinian people. They're in violation of international law, according to the UN itself. And they are guilty participating in this war of aggression. So I'm not saying they're without blame. I'm just saying they are a proxy. The source of the problem is the United States, just like the source of the problem in Ukraine is the United States. The source of the problem in Venezuela is the United States. The source of the problem in Asia Pacific is the United States. But these people who are trying to blame Israel all told all of us before 2024, the elections, that President Trump was going to turn everything around. They were 100% wrong about it. Some people have the grace and integrity to admit they just made a mistake and to look at why they made the mistake and try to improve their ability to perform analysis. Others cannot admit they made a mistake, and so they need a scapegoat, and the scapegoat is Israel. If they can blame Israel, somehow they hijacked the Trump administration. They have tremendous power over the Trump administration, and the U.S. is just this poor innocent victim, then they could absolve themselves of their poor analysis before the 2024 election. And then people will scream, AIPAC, AIPAC. And then I'm glad that people notice that there is lobbying taking place in Washington. That's a very good first step. But AIPAC is not the only organization performing lobbying in Washington. It's not even the only US proxy. Ukraine has lobbyists. Taiwan is not even a country. They have lobbyists. I was just talking about MEK, Mujahideen al-Khaliqa, Iranian terrorist organization, that people in the Trump administration, before the first Trump administration, these were soon to be senior officials in the Trump administration, were lobbying for years to get MEK delisted. And MEK was paying money to them to get them delisted, but it wasn't as if it was MEK's idea. Lobbying is simply the way these proxies officially and legally interact with the US government. That's how it works. If you want to see who actually controls Washington, look at where most of the money is coming from. It's coming from the arms industry, big oil, big pharma, big tech. That's who's running what, that's who's always run the United States.
Yeah, exactly. And it is interesting too. And I know that, to be fair, Netanyahu is a very willing villain, right? That's what keeps him popular at home. I believe it was Reuters put out an article earlier in which they said something to the effect of, oh, this Iran war is really helping Netanyahu while hurting Trump and the Gulf states. And it's like, yeah, for Netanyahu, he promised the Israeli people, oh, I'm going to, make sure that there's not a Palestinian state. Oh, and also I'm going to get you a war with Iran. And now he has got that. Now, at the same time, we also have the Gulf region. And this is another part too. I guess it kind of plays into the debate that the argument that, well, this war is quote unquote good for Israel in the sense that, even just talking about all of these Gulf states being impacted by the lack of oil trade, by now their energy facilities being targeted by Iran, lack of tourism, lack of overall trade, lack of complete preparation, they're now getting into a dire position that they are, you could argue that that's good for Israel, right? Because they're like, hey, rest of the region's weaker than us. But then they argue that that's not necessarily good for the U.S. because these are all U.S. vassal states. How do you see the position that the Gulf region is, especially when it comes to, say, Qatar, the UAE, Bahrain is another big one, maybe not Saudi Arabia as much, but really just this kind of region that finds themselves in this place where, yeah, they've been fine being U.S. vassal states for years now, but when it comes down to it, now they're actually targets in this war.
Well, exactly. U.S. proxies are ultimately fully expendable if and when necessary, up to and including Israel. And by the way, it's not just the Arab states in the region politically captured by the U.S. Having their energy production facilities hit, damage being done to their cities. Israel is also getting hit by ballistic missiles and drones every single day. And now they're provoking a war with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is also launching rockets and missiles and defending the border of southern Lebanon against an Israeli military invasion, essentially. And so they're all suffering from this. The one country that isn't having missiles land on them is the United States. Yes, the military in the region, but again, from America's point of view, the military is always also expendable. They always have been. I mean, how many were sent off to die in the 2003 Iraq invasion or the Vietnam War? So that's your answer. Who is ultimately benefiting from this, and who is suffering? Yes, the Arab states are being weakened to an extent. So is Israel. At the end of the day, it's just like with Ukraine. The U.S. will spend Ukraine all the way to the last Ukrainian and the last building, if necessary, to keep the war going on against Russia, to weaken Russia. And they will continue doing this to not just the Arab states, but also Israel to the fullest extent they can, to hurt Iran to the maximum extent that they can. And so this is the price you pay for being a U.S. proxy. You may have like a period of time where things seem to be working in your favor, but at the end of the day, you are a proxy. And the whole reason you are a proxy is to pay the price for American foreign policy so the U.S. doesn't have to, and they only reap the benefits.
Yeah, definitely good to keep in mind. And I know that, for Ukraine, yeah, you can easily look at it and say, okay, they'll fight till the last Ukrainian. Clearly, the U.S. doesn't care about the Ukrainian people. But when it comes down to Israel, I'm also curious too, because this is the favorite project of the US, right? This is the special relationship. Does there come a point where Israel sustains so much damage that they say that the US kind of realizes, hey, we can't do this anymore. We have to find a way to get out of this war. And then to a certain extent, it's too late because now you have an entire region that's like, hey, for as long as Israel has existed here, they have presented problems. They have brought chaos, death, and destruction to the region. We don't want to put up with this anymore. And to some of the demands that Iran is making, right? Where they're like, we want the US presence out of our region. We want these US military bases to be destroyed and we don't want them to be around our country. These are our terms for a possible deal if you want to get into negotiations again. How do you see that kind of back and forth and really how much the US is willing to give to this fight, even as, yes, it sees that end goal of we're trying to hurt Russia, trying to hurt China really in the process?
The ultimate clock that is ticking here is China's irreversible rise and surpassing of not just the United States, but the entire West. And that's probably around 5 years, maybe 10 years at most. And that's in the hope in the mind of the US that this conflict in and of itself might help slow that down. China was aiming for a certain degree of energy independence from the Middle East by 2030. So that's very close in terms of geopolitics. That's a very short period of time. And if you look at what China has been doing internally, the drive to build nuclear power, renewables, coal to liquid facilities to take coal and make the type of fuels necessary to replace imports from the Middle East. This has been...
You want to file free? Hit it.
Being pushed so hard and so fast that there was a likelihood that they would reach that. So the US, from their point of view, this has to happen now. They took a pause at 2025 to regroup and reorganize, rearm, and now they've restarted the war again, and they might pause it, reorganize, and start it again. From their point of view, they have nothing to lose by trying. They cannot accept China surpassing the US irreversibly, acquiring the power necessary to prevent the US from ever threatening their rise ever again. Again, like if you just look at the industry, the drive, the economy, everything that China has versus the US has no way to compete. So they're trying to basically kneecap China now while they still can, because there will be a period in the near future where that will no longer be a possibility. So from their point of view, we can expend all of the Arab states, even Israel, if necessary. Israel has nuclear weapons. We're playing this game where we're pretending we have no control over Israel. So if nuclear weapons need to be used, this is the perfect way to use it. Again, the 2009 Brookings Institution paper, Which Path to Persia, has a whole chapter titled Leave It to Bibi. And if you read it, it's basically blame it on Bibi. That's what the chapter is spelling out. We can use Israel to attack Iran, start a catastrophic war, blame them for it, and have them absorb the majority of the retaliation amid that war. That's literally what is happening right now. That's what happened last year. That is what's happening right now. And again, to get back to these people constantly blaming Israel or inferring that Jewish people control the United States, they say, aha, look, Brian, we got you. Look at the authors of that paper. There's 4 Jews and 2 Gentiles. And when people are talking like that, should already be a warning flag for you. But the point is, they're exposing the critical deficiency in their ability to do analysis. Their criteria for Jewish people controlling the US and some sort of Jewish conspiracy is simply them being Jewish. It's like saying President Trump's a Christian, so he's secretly working for the Vatican and the Jesuits. It doesn't make any sense at all. And there's an entire chapter in the paper talking about using Israel as a disposable proxy. And that is literally verbatim what has now taken place. So again, material reality versus the fantasies that your mind is constructing to try to rationalize a reality that you feel uncomfortable with.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to that kind of long-term strategy, right? Sometimes it's easier to just look at what's right in front of you and say, okay, we're going to focus on this only. But exactly as you're saying there, right? Looking at this timeline, because you know that the US establishment as a whole, that's exactly what they're doing. They're looking at China, they're looking at China's capabilities. They're going, okay, just like they did with Russia, right? how can we hit Russia here, here, and here? How can we get them locked into this proxy war where if something happens in Syria and things aren't going great there, guess what? Russia can't just hop over to Syria and save the Assad government. They're busy in Ukraine. And now they have Iran in this position where they have targeted it with sanctions for years. Now they're targeting it with a number of high profile assassinations. The last thing I wanted to get into, because I know another element here when it comes to Russia and China, while yes, Iran is their ally, Iran is an important pillar of the multipolar world. At the same time, it's also not the end of the world to Russia and China that the US is getting a little bit tied up over here in the Middle East, right? That they are moving, whether it's their THAAD system from South Korea or the USS Tripoli from Japan, possibly looking at moving it over to Iran, or they're just completely taking their eye off of Ukraine. What are you keeping an eye on when it comes to Russia and China and really how they are using this time to their benefit in every way that they can to make sure that when it comes to that eventual fight with the US, and this goes more towards China, that they are more prepared for it than ever. And the US is now in a position where they not only can't keep up how they can now, but maybe possibly decide not to get into that fight if that's even an option.
So again, I believe the US was looking at their pool of resources, everything in their imagination that they wish they could do, and then the reality of what they could actually do. And that is why they're attempting to impose again, if you look at it, the US is imposing a global maritime oil blockade on China. Again, the New York Times admitted that, and if you thought about it logically, it was obvious that it was the CIA, it was the US doing these drone strikes on oil production deep inside Russia, the maritime drone strikes in the Black Sea. Okay, maybe you could say that was Ukraine, but then in the Mediterranean, not really. And then off the coast of West Africa is definitely the US doing that. They're the only ones capable of doing that. And then the New York Times admitted that it's them doing it. So they're attacking Russian energy production and exports, which are mainly going to China. They have hijacked Venezuela. The energy was mainly going to China. They're waging full-scale war on Iran, whose energy was almost entirely going to China. And now this is spreading out of control. The US acts as if it's accidental, but it's spreading out of control. It's affecting production across the entire region, which is going to throttle energy exports from the rest of the region to China. So it's a maritime oil blockade imposed on China, far from where the Chinese military can contest it. That's what they're doing because of the lack of resources they have. It doesn't mean that they don't have forces. They have tens of thousands of forces in Asia Pacific. They have Japan, South Korea to a certain degree, the Philippines, the island province of Taiwan set up as their own little Israels and Ukraines in the region to wage a proxy war against China. And the US can just sit back and let these countries get annihilated. And if you think about World War II, the US was on the other side of the planet, two oceans on either side of it. Everybody else was killing each other, destroying each other's cities and industry. And at the end of it, the US emerged a global superpower. And they've tried to cling to that primacy ever since. And they're imagining in their minds, this is a possible way we could do this again. We could repeat this again, just burn the whole, we can't control the world because we don't have the resources, and the multipolar world is rising faster than we can tear it down. So let's just burn everything down all at once, no matter what the cost, even at the cost to us. At the end of it, when we emerge out relative to China, maybe we will be stronger. For China and Russia, though, it's not like they're sitting there on their hands doing nothing. And just as you say, this conflict with Iran is depleting a huge amount of American military capabilities that were specifically being reserved for some sort of conflict with China. And you could argue, well, they are spending it on China. They would have spent it in the Asia Pacific, imposing the distant blockade and say the Strait of Malacca. Now they're doing it at the Strait of Hormuz. You could argue that, but at the end of the day, you're wasting your military resources that you're going to take years to build back. The US is on this basically a global murder spree. They're just invading, kidnapping, destroying nations all around the globe as fast as possible until their resources run out. I hope their momentum carries them forward fast enough, faster than the rest of the world has the ability or will to organize against them. And I think that's what Russia and China are trying to calculate. How do we burn the US out before we end up having to fight an actual war directly with the US, which would be catastrophic. Because again, all of these countries at the end all have nuclear weapons, huge amounts of nuclear weapons to destroy the world many times over. So KJ, no, he has the perfect analogy. The US is like an angry drunk at a bar. Everyone knows he's going to start a fight. He's going to destroy the entire place if anyone provokes them. So they're trying to be nice to him. They're trying to get him out, get him to go home without causing a scene. And they'll do anything, almost anything. The drunk is threatening to beat them up. They're like, yeah, you could beat me up. I'm no match for you. Can you just like get out of here and go home and take a rest? I mean, that's a good analogy for what I think Russia and China's strategy is.
Yeah, and no better drunk than Donald Trump to be the face of the empire right at this point. But exactly as you said, the US would rather burn it all down than to admit that China is a legitimate competitor, right? That China is beating them in any of these ways. And China's over here being like, hey, we want to work with everybody. And the US cannot handle that. They cannot handle not being the top empire. And that's very dangerous when they start to get desperate, exactly as you noted. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around and a lot for us to continue to cover and to talk about. And I really appreciate you taking the time to
Go, Fig. Follow me